Chapter 1, Rainy Night. A pack of instant noodles, 15 yuan. The cashier took out the scanner, but saw the other person hand over a 20 yuan note. Okay, here's your change of 5 yuan. With that, the cashier couldn't help but look up and take another look at the slender young girl in front of the counter. She was wearing the school uniform of the nearby Inshan College, had waist-length hair, a delicate and small face, and skin that was pale without any foundation but also had a hint of sickness. However, her eyes were like precious stones, like an ancient well with no ripples and a touch of coldness. She really was a pretty girl. After the girl took the instant noodle bag and change, she walked out of the convenience store. As the automatic door opened, a slight coolness came with the smell of moisture mixed with the asphalt floor, caressing her cheeks. She lifted her eyes slightly, and the mist covered the neon buildings in a veil, quieting the hustle and bustle of the city a little. It's raining. After stuffing the instant noodles into her satchel, the girl reached out to open the umbrella, but something caught her eye in the corner. It was a man. 26 or 27 years old, wearing a black suit, but the collar had been roughly torn open, and the tie hung around his neck in a semicircle. The man seemed to have been here for a while, and there were open beer cans scattered at his feet. At the moment the girl was observing him, the man also lifted his dull eyes. The moment their gazes met, the man suddenly smiled and spoke. "Little sister, it's very dangerous for a pretty flower of the motherland like you to stand here staring at a strange man," he said, slightly moving his stiff body, his calves colliding with the beer can, making a crisp sound. "I didn't think I'd been sleeping on the street for so long, hee." Yi Shuang muttered, his smile looking like a bitter smile on his face. The events of the past few days could be summed up in one sentence: unemployment, heartbreak, and the loss of his parents. Sitting on the steps of a convenience store, Yi Shuang tilted his head slightly, his vacant eyes looking at the distant skyscrapers. Such a prosperous city could not accommodate just one person like him. No matter how hard you try, you may never reach the starting point of some people. What is the point of living? His eyes fell on the puddle not far away, where raindrops were falling. Yi Shuang felt a little lost at this moment. He felt like a drop of water, unable to cause the slightest ripple when falling into the puddle. No one cares where you come from or where you are going. Ka. The sound of a plastic bag suddenly rang out in the rain. Yi Shuang noticed that the young girl who had been watching him had moved a little closer, and she now had an extra package in her hand. A package of instant noodles? Master Kang's wife's instant noodles, a 5-pack. It's still the old jar pickled cabbage flavor. Yi Shuang. After a moment of silence, Yi Shuang looked at the young girl in front of him, who was trying to stuff the instant noodles into her bosom, and couldn't help but ask, "What are you giving me this for?" The young girl looked at Yi Shuang for a full few seconds before she spoke in a tiny, mosquito-like voice. "It's hard to be hungry." Yi Shuang was stunned, but subconsciously took the instant noodles. He looked at the girl's gaze as she silently watched him, took out his phone, and saw the time through the cracked screen. 0:12 a.m. "It's so late, hurry home." Yi Shuang said, "Your family will worry about you, right?" Upon hearing this, the girl's beautiful eyes seemed to darken a little. She looked at Yi Shuang again, then turned and left, holding her umbrella. "How can I eat such a big package? It's not even in a cup." Yi Shuang looked at the slender figure in the distance, which was getting farther and farther away, and then at the large package of instant noodles in his hands. He couldn't help but smile self-deprecatingly. Maybe this child doesn't know that I don't even have a place to live, right? Yes, there isn't a place here that belongs to me. But at this moment, the stone weighing on Yi Shuang's heart seemed to have eased a little. After all, it always feels warm to receive the kindness of a stranger. And she's such a pretty girl. Yi Shuang slowly got up. Perhaps it was because he had drunk a lot, but he still felt dizzy, and his mouth was dry and he had trouble swallowing. He opened the last bottle of beer to rinse his mouth and quench his thirst, then felt in his pocket for a pack of dry cigarettes. He looked in the direction the girl had left, but froze. In the distance, 2 men were holding the white umbrella between them, one on each side. There was even an action of pulling. Damn, they're not even sparing the students? Ye's beer cans in his hands suddenly got squished. With the rain getting heavier, he took a step forward. At this time, the young girl was being pulled by the 2 men. "Oops, it's already 12 o'clock anyway, so let's go to the bar and have some fun. You don't really want to go home, do you, little sister? Let's go, we have a lot of students your age over there, and everyone is having a great time." Pushed along by the 2 men, the young girl was a little overwhelmed, clutching her umbrella. She was even too frightened to make a sound. Seeing that the young girl did not make a sound or resist, the two men, emboldened by the sight of each other's handsome faces, reached out to touch her. Pop! A slap mixed with rainwater suddenly landed on one of the men's face, sending out a loud, crisp slap sound and a spray of water. Ah! Accompanied by a scream, the man who tried to get his hands on her was suddenly knocked to the ground by a slap. Mud and water soaked his entire body, and he couldn't get up for a long time. This scene also stunned the man's companion, who was directly scared into a stupor. At this time, Yi Shuang stood in the middle of the puddle. The smell of alcohol mixed with the water vapor, and his tall figure looked even more murderous. You. I'm telling you, you dare to hit my brother. I'll beat you too. Yi Shuang directly pulled the young girl next to him, and then kicked the other person to the ground. After doing all this, he grabbed the young girl's wrist and ran, weaving through the rain-soaked night, the rushing rain quickly soaking the two of them. Bai Yu looked blankly at the man in front of her, who was pulling her along, and for some reason, she could not bring herself to stop. This should be fine. Before long, Yi Shuang brought the girl to the bus stop, but he also noticed that he had been holding the other person's wrist the whole time, so he immediately let go. Did I hurt you? I was just a little anxious. Bai Yu shook her head. A few damp strands of hair stuck to her fair face, making her look even more beautiful. Yi Shuang also noticed at this time that the other person's clothes were completely soaked in the rain, and her skin was pressed against the clothes, which completely revealed the color of her skin. Underwear. Yi Shuang noticed at this time that the other party was not wearing any underwear at all. Bai Yu heard what she said and just tilted her head a little, her face still showing no expression. It's fine, where is your home? I'll take you back. Yi Shuang looked away at this time and said, next time don't go out alone so late, got it? Bai Yu nodded her head and pointed her hand across the road to a building. Is that your home? Yi Shuang asked, and after getting a nod in response, he looked at the underground pedestrian crossing on the other side of the road and said, let's go. The girl lived in an old residential community, not far from the convenience store they had just passed. The community security guard was an old man in his 70s or 80s, who was sound asleep in the rattan chair in the security booth. Maybe it was because it was more comfortable to sleep on a rainy day. Is this the place? After entering the community and looking at the 6-story building in front of him and the dark green iron gate, Yi Shuang withdrew his gaze and went back, not to worry his parents. Even to avoid seeing certain places, Yi Shuang at this time also looked at the iron gate to the side. But at this time, Bai Yu reached out and grabbed the hem of his shirt. Under the dim light of the main door, Bai Yu's expression at this time gave Yi Shuang the illusion of seeing an abandoned animal under a street lamp. Okay, I'll walk you up. Yi Shuang looked at the dark hallway beyond the door and thought that the girl was afraid of what had just happened. But when he arrived on the 4th floor and was led into a unit, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Chapter 2, A Girl with No Common Sense. After Yi Shuang was led into the unit by Bai Yu, he realized that the house was pitch black and he couldn't feel the presence of anyone else at all. Living alone? The air was filled with a faint musty smell, and it seemed as if there were things scattered on the floor. With a click, the light suddenly turned on, and Yi Shuang could see what was on the floor clearly, all kinds of miscellaneous objects in jars and bottles, paper boxes, underwear, and other things. It's so messy. But after all, it is someone else's home, and Yi Shuang didn't know what to say. He turned his head and just wanted to talk to the young girl, but he found that the other party was already pulling her clothes up with both hands, revealing a smooth belly without a hint of excess fat in the lower half of the ball. What are you doing? Yi Shuang said immediately when he saw this scene. Bai Yu heard this and just calmly looked at her actions at the moment, then whispered, taking a shower. Then shouldn't you change in the bathroom? Bai Yu heard this and asked in return, but, this is how I always change. Yi Shuang was a little helpless at this point. Do your parents change clothes like this when they are at home? Bai Yu looked at Yi Shuang for a while before lowering her eyes and saying, I don't have parents. I'm sorry. I don't know what I did wrong. Yi Shuang opened his mouth slightly, not knowing what to say for a moment. The rain outside the window was slapping against the windows, but he could read the girl's emotions through the sound of the rain. I really am not a human being. After holding it in for a long time, Yi Shuang said, I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing? Bai Yu asked, tilting her head slightly. Her pretty face showed a hint of confusion. Did you do something wrong? No. Yi Shuang hesitated for a moment, then looked around and found the bathroom. It was as if he was changing the subject. Let's take a shower first, otherwise you'll catch a cold. Bai Yu heard this, but reached out and pulled Yi Shuang's wetsuit jacket. Why don't you take off your clothes? This time, Yi Shuang didn't ask why, but just patiently said, because I'm a man, and I can only shower alone. He realized that the girl in front of him seemed a little abnormal. To be more precise, it would be more accurate to describe her as without common sense. After hearing this, Bai Yu just nodded and went to take a shower by herself. Soon, the sound of the shower inside came up. Listening to the sound of the water inside, Yi Shuang sat on a wooden chair and felt in his pockets, but found that his cigarette had gotten wet and even his lighter was nowhere to be seen. Yi Shuang sighed slightly and felt in his other pocket. As a result, his hand completely went through, and he could even feel the leg hair on his thigh. Yi Shuang. Shit, where's my phone? Yi Shuang trembled as he squeezed out a cigarette. Although it was no longer able to be lit, he still inserted it into his mouth and sucked hard. The bitter tobacco mixed with the smell of rainwater, causing Yi Shuang to frown slightly. His chaotic mood finally calmed down a little. The perspective in front of him seemed to have blurred a little. He looked intently, and at this moment, there was an additional window in the cigarette in his hand. Item: drenched cigarette. Unable to be lit, of no particular use. Seeing this translucent window, Yi Shuang was not the least bit surprised. This is something he has been able to see since he was a child. Apart from being able to see the information of certain items, it has no effect whatsoever. It is not like in fiction, where one can do anything, be it in heaven or on earth. Reality is, after all, reality. When I was young, I always thought I could save the world, but when I grew up, I realized that the world could not save me. When did my former dream silently die in this rainy night? Soon, the bathroom door next to her opened, and with it came a steady stream of white mist. Bai Yu walked out, holding her clothes. Yi Shuang's cigarette fell to the ground, but he immediately stood up and said, "Put your clothes on first before coming out." Bai Yu looked at the damp clothes in her hands, and reached out to put them on. Stop. Yi Shuang stopped her and asked, "Where are the clothes you want to change into?" Bai Yu pointed with her hand to the clothes hanging on the balcony. Yi Shuang only noticed at this time that there were quite a few clothes hanging on the balcony, but he soon became dumbfounded because the balcony was full of school uniforms, and they were still the kind of more formal uniforms. Not to mention pajamas, you can't even see a looser t-shirt. He reached out and touched one of the pleated skirts, but found that it was still wet. Item: pleated skirt. The skirt hasn't dried yet, so it's not of any particular use. Yi Shuang looked at the other clothes. Item: black silk pantyhose. Shouldn't have any use yet. Item: snow white underwear. Should have some use yet. Item: Silver Mountain Academy girls' school uniform. Crumpled school uniform, hasn't dried yet. Finally, Yi Shuang saw a bath towel, so he pulled it off the balcony and walked back to Bai Yu's side, handed it over, and wrapped it around her. Wrapped around. Bai Yu looked at the bath towel in Yi Shuang's hands, and then wrapped it around her lower body. It needs to be on top too. Oh. After a while of tossing and turning, Yi Shuang finally got the young girl in front of him to wrap the towel around her. Nevertheless, the young girl's slender, snow-white legs were still eye-catching, perfect like a work of art. After calming herself down, Yi Shuang noticed that Bai Yu had started drying her clothes. After the clothes that had been changed were hung on the pole, the water dripping down was like an exaggerated waterfall. No wonder the clothes didn't dry quickly. At first, Yi Shuang thought it was just because of the bad weather. You don't wring them out? After seeing this, Yi Shuang was silent for a while before saying, "How long have you been living alone?" Bai Yu just said, "I don't know, it's been a long time." Yi Shuang walked over to Bai Yu and took all the clothes down, then wrung them out. At this time, he also noticed that the clothes didn't smell of washing powder at all, so it was obvious that he didn't even know how to use it. After hanging the clothes back up, Yi Shuang sighed, his gaze falling on Bai Yu next to him. "Little sister, you need to learn some common sense. If you want to live a good life on your own, this is not going to work." Bai Yu just looked at Yi Shuang without saying a word. "Forget it, I'm having a hard time myself, so who am I to judge others?" Yi Shuang scratched his head and sighed again, before saying, "Little sister, I should go too. Remember, next time don't bring strange men like me home, it's dangerous." With that, Yi Shuang planned to leave. After all, it's not good to stay in the house of a single girl. The next second, he felt a tug on his clothes, and he turned around, only to find Bai Yu reaching out and holding onto him. She asked in a low voice, "Why are you leaving?" Because I have to go make money, you can't live in this world without money. Yi Shuang laughed, then shrugged playfully. Unfortunately, there is no rich woman who can support me, otherwise I can struggle less for 30 years. What is support? Support means giving money to the other person to support them. Yi Shuang said. Bai Yu silently let go of his hand and turned around and went straight back to her room. Yi Shuang didn't care too much about it. He walked to the front door and was about to reach out and unlock the door to leave when there was a stumbling sound behind him. Yi Shuang froze for a moment and turned around. He saw that Bai Yu's bathrobe had been ripped off at some point, but in her arms she was hugging a thick stack of banknotes. In Yi Shuang's shocked gaze, the young girl stuffed the money and the man into his arms together. In the sound of rain, a light voice sounded again. Money, I'll support you. Chapter 3, The Strange Cell Phone Store Owner. Subconsciously hugged the money and the young girl in his arms. At this time, Yi Shuang's mind was still a little confused. After all, the pile of banknotes in front of him and the innocent young girl gave off such a strong visual impact that even Yi Shuang, who felt the glare, couldn't help but squint his eyes. Yi Shuang estimated that there were about 10,000 bills in the pile, and there were at least 200,000 to 300,000 in cash in front of him alone. Since mobile payments had become popular, Yi Shuang had only realized how heavy a few 100,000 yuan could be. Let's wrap it up first. After Yi Shuang put the money on the table next to him, he found the bath towel that had fallen to the ground. He wrapped Bai Yu up again, a bit like a dumpling. Bai Yu had a great figure, just hidden by her school uniform. As his fingers brushed against her skin unintentionally, they felt as soft and delicate as tofu. Yi Shuang couldn't help but wonder why a girl living alone had so much money and even offered to support him. Obviously, he didn't even know what support meant. A beautiful girl living alone with so much cash at home, Yi Shuang couldn't imagine what dangerous things someone might do if they found out about this. Not to mention that the security in this neighborhood is almost non-existent. The security guard in his 70s probably has trouble walking, let alone catching a bad guy. Looking at the young girl in front of him, who was looking at her with quiet eyes, Yi Shuang suddenly couldn't completely rest assured that she was living alone. Where did all this money come from? Out of caution, Yi Shuang asked. Bai Yu simply replied, My mom gave it to me, in response to Yi Shuang's question. Mom? Does she not have parents? It's not quite the same as what I understand. Or perhaps her mother left her a large sum of cash before she died. At this time, Bai Yu asked, Isn't this money enough to support you? I still have a lot. Yi Shuang. Pinching his eyebrows, Yi Shuang sat in silence for a while, then he looked at the girl's flawless and delicate face. His confused heart suddenly seemed to find some direction, like a ship off course that had found the light of a lighthouse. Perhaps it was all destined to be. In the city embracing the hazy rainy night, he was picked up by such an unintelligent girl. The heavy rain outside was still falling, but at that moment, the rain in Yi Shuang's heart gradually stopped, the overcast gradually dispersed, revealing a glimmer of light. Yi Shuang walked slowly over to the table next to him, picked up a stack of bills and said, In that case, I'll stay here for the time being, until our relationship ends. On a rainy night, an agreement was made, and fate began. Early morning. Yi Shuang woke up as dawn broke. The sound of rain stopped outside the window, and faintly, he could hear a few cheerful birds chirping. The rain had washed the city clean. Yi Shuang tidied up the whole house a bit, and after considering for a few seconds, he also took the opportunity to wash the underwear on the floor. Seeing the tidy house, he felt a little more at ease. It was truly magical to be supported by a beautiful girl. Looking at the house in front of him, Yi Shuang suddenly felt a sense of unreality. Well, since he's already done it, he shouldn't think about it so much. He was still wet, and after all, a girl's house couldn't possibly have clothes for a 1.8-meter tall guy like him to wear, but none of that mattered to Yi Shuang. He fell asleep quickly last night lying on the floor. At this time, there was no movement in the room, so it seemed that the girl hadn't gotten up yet. Right, I haven't even asked her name. Just as Yi Shuang was thinking this, he suddenly noticed the student card placed on the table next to him. Haizhu Inshan College. Name, Bai Yu. Class, 3rd year, Class A. 3rd year, that's probably around the age of 18? After silently memorizing the other person's name, Yi Shuang took the key next to the table and went straight out the door. Although he had lost his phone, he was lucky that his wallet had not been lost and was safely in the pocket of his jacket. Although his wallet was empty and he could not take out a single bill, his bank card was still there. Yi Shuang planned to buy a phone first and then save the money. After all, in the information age, it was almost impossible to get by without a phone. Although he was not the type of person to hold a phone in his hand all day, buying a phone was very necessary. Considering that he did not have the means to shop online, Yishuan walked into a mobile phone store on the street. What do you need? The owner of the mobile phone store was a girl with bangs down to her shoulders, her hair neatly groomed and looking very neat. She was wearing baggy sweatshirts and trousers, and at the moment she looked a little lazy with headphones on. She was probably about the same age as Bai Yu, and looked quite cute too. Are you here to look at phones or women? The girl spoke again, a hint of disgust in her eyes. Yishuan was momentarily taken aback, and then looked away to the glass display case next to him, where rows of mobile phones were lined up. Most of them were second-hand and mainly Apple models, with the remainder being low-priced 100 yuan elderly phones. I need a cheaper phone, Yi Shuang said. This Nokia 150. The girl took out a push-button phone and placed it in front of Yi Shuang. As she spoke, she pressed a large button on the phone, and the lens on the top of the phone lit up with a white light. Oh, and it can also be used as a flashlight. Isn't that amazing? The other person sounded like she was introducing some kind of black technology, and Yi Shuang couldn't help but twitch at the corner of his mouth. Pointing at himself, he asked, "How old do you think I am?" Upon hearing this, the girl looked at his face very seriously. 60? 26. Yi Shuang immediately said, "Have you ever seen someone who was 26 years old using a phone for the elderly?" The girl looked away and let out a sound of disgust. You just smacked your lips, didn't you? No, you heard wrong, sir. The girl said, pointing to a row of iPhones in the glass showcase. If you want a smartphone, these are the ones. They were all secondhand because of various problems, so see if you can find one that works. Yi Shuang. Why are all the girls I meet these days so abnormal? Won't you go out of business if you run a phone shop like this? No Apple? Do you have any recommendations for Android phones? Yi Shuang said. He had previously owned an Apple phone, and had had enough of having to carry an extra power bank with him every day. Oh, an Android phone. The girl said, and then bent down and started rummaging through the boxes. After a while, she took out a box and offered it to him, saying, "This one's a bit of a hard sell, so I'll let you have it cheap." Yi Shuang glanced at it and asked, "Does it charge quickly?" It should be fast, right? It can be fully charged in one charge. Do you have to charge your phone several times to get a full charge? Maybe, so are you buying it or not? Being called uncle made Yi Shuang feel like he had been shot in the heart. After taking a look at the approximate battery capacity of the phone case, he decided to buy it. How much is it? 600. That's cheap? Oh, then 6,000. Hey, that's a big difference, isn't it? The girl in front of him had beady eyes. She was a real pain in the neck, not being able to make up her mind. As a man, he wasn't very good at this. Yi Shuang was a little speechless. He took out the cash and counted out 6 bills. However, after seeing this, the other party was slightly surprised. Cash? What's wrong with using cash? No, a friend of mine also likes to use cash. After the girl finished speaking, she resumed her lazy appearance. Chapter 4, A Girl with No Sense of Distance. After simply activating and setting up her phone, Yi Shuang saw that there was no SIM card displayed in the signal list. Her gaze once again fell on the girl, who was applying for a SIM card. ID card, 50. Yi Shuang took out a bill and ID card and handed them over. The girl glanced at the birthday on it and said, "Really 26? What else? Judging from your disheveled appearance, you look more like a horny uncle suffering from a midlife crisis." The girl leaned against the glass display case, propping her face on her hands. Her carefree manner of speaking was still so infuriating. But Yi Shuang's current situation was actually similar to a midlife crisis. The only difference was probably that he wasn't bald yet. And why am I a horny uncle? Because you've been staring at me the whole time. The girl's tone was flat. You? Yi Shuang was a little speechless. Although he just felt that this girl was just a little older than Bai Yu and looked at her a little longer, he could not refute the other party's statement. Forget it. After getting the mobile phone signal, Yi Shuang downloaded the frequently used software and quickly left the mobile phone store under the girl's inexplicable gaze. First, he deposited the stack of cash into his card, and then Yi Shuang bought himself some clothes, which he changed in the dressing room. No longer wearing damp clothes and underwear, Yishuang finally felt a lot more comfortable. When he took off his work attire and put on short sleeves, he had never felt so relaxed. It was as if the shackles that had been imprisoning his soul had been unlocked. After looking at the more than 9,000 yuan left in his card, Yishuang thought for a moment and went to the business hall again to report his lost SIM card as lost. Although this phone is cheap, it supports dual SIM and dual standby. After reporting the phone lost, it was almost noon. I wonder how she is doing. I'd better go back first. Yishuang was walking on the street and couldn't help but think of Bai Yuyu's face. Come to think of it, did she buy instant noodles last night? She probably can't cook, otherwise she wouldn't have run out in the middle of the night just to buy instant noodles. Yishuang pondered, his gaze falling on the vegetable vendor next to him. This is the old district, with many urban villages. Not only is there a lot of movement of people, but there are also a lot of people selling things from street stalls. Although there are fewer vegetable sellers at this hour, he was still able to buy some. After simply buying some eggs, tomatoes, cucumbers and other vegetables, he picked up the bag and quickened his pace to go back. Soon, he returned to the front door of the apartment building. The faint smell of rust from the tip of his nose made Yishuang can't help but look down the keyhole. He suddenly noticed that there was a liquid trail running all the way down the keyhole to the ground, and the watermark still had a copper-colored rust residue. It was as if someone had deliberately poured something liquid into it. Yishuang frowned slightly, then took out the key, turned the door lock, and noticed that the door did not open as easily as he had imagined. Classmate Bai Yuyu, are you awake? After successfully opening the door, Yishuang just walked in, and the next moment, his body stiffened as if he had been electrocuted. He saw the long-haired girl lying on the ground, her hair scattered around her like tree roots. She had her eyes closed and her face was pale. Yishuang hurried over to her, grabbed her shoulders and gave her a push, but she didn't respond. Bai Yuyu's body temperature wasn't high, and she even felt a little cold to the touch. Yishuang saw that something was wrong and immediately picked up his phone to call for help. But the moment he took out his phone, he met the girl's pair of beautiful, clear eyes. You're okay? Yishuang let out a small sigh of relief when he saw that Bai Yuyu had actually opened her eyes and was looking at him. Bai Yuyu quietly looked at Yishuang, probably just standing still for 7 or 8 seconds, when a gurgling sound came from her stomach, followed by the girl's voice. Hungry. Yishuang. Why would someone starve themselves into unconsciousness? Didn't you eat anything yesterday? Yishuang looked at Bai Yuyu, who was sitting on the floor in a cross-legged position, and asked. Instant noodles, here you go. Bai Yuyu said, a stray hair rising slightly from her head. Recalling last night's pack of 5 instant noodles with beef and pickled vegetables, Yishuang's mouth twitched. Why didn't you go out and get something to eat? There's still breakfast for sale outside. Bai Yuyu, however, lowered her eyes, a few strands of hair sliding down her shoulders. Her tone was also a little lost, as she said, I can't find the keys. Yishuang subconsciously felt for the key in his pocket. Obviously, he had taken it with him. After holding it in for a while, he let out. My mistake. Bai Yuyu heard this, but at the moment, her face came close, so close that there was no sense of distance at all. Her voice was very slow and gentle. Mistake? The sudden closeness made Yishuang feel a missed beat in his heart for no reason. Thinking about the almost 8-year age difference between the two of them, he silently said a word of guilt in his heart, and then stood up, picked up the food and walked into the kitchen. Wait for me, we'll eat soon. Oh. The kitchen in this house hasn't been used for a while, but traces of the last time it was used can still be seen, which makes Yishuang feel slightly strange. Logically speaking, if Bai Yuyu can't cook, then there shouldn't be any traces of tidying up in the kitchen either. Could it be that someone else has lived in this house? But after thinking about the fact that he doesn't know anything more about Bai Yuyu, Yishuang didn't put this matter in his heart. He skillfully picked up the kitchen knife and rubbed it on the bottom of the bowl. After cutting the tomatoes and beating the eggs, he simply made a dish of fried tomatoes and eggs. And because he hadn't bought any meat, he also made a dish of stir-fried cucumbers, and then made a soup with loofah and fried eggs. Bai Yuyu stayed by Yishuang's side the whole time, watching him skillfully, and from time to time, she would help by passing him the seasoning bottles and plates. For the rest of the time, Bai Yuyu kept her eyes on Yishuang, wearing a clean t-shirt. His figure was thin but not weak at all, his black hair scattered casually in front of his forehead, and his eyes under his dark eyebrows did not look sharp at all. Instead, there was a touch of tenderness in those deep eyes, which, coupled with his high nose bridge and thin lips, made him a complete hunk. At this moment, Yishuang felt something was wrong, because the young girl next to him was almost pressing against him. Even through the school uniform, he could feel the heavy pressure and temperature, not to mention the body odor that came from the tip of his nose from time to time. Turning his head, he met the expressionless little face. Yi Shuang had to smile and say, "Is it a bit too close?" Bai Yu seemed to not quite understand, and just asked with a tilted head, "Did I do something wrong?" "It has nothing to do with being wrong," Yi Shuang said, and then remembered his status as a kept man. "Forget it, it's much better than a steel wool ball, and he's the one taking advantage. Especially since Bai Yu doesn't know much about anything, which makes Yi Shuang feel even more guilty." Just then, Bai Yu leaned in a little closer. Chapter 5, Always Together? Yi Shuang could only let Bai Yu cling to her like this, because her attention was constantly on the stove. The pot was still steaming, and the fat from the fried eggs had fully emulsified under the heat of the water, making the soup gradually turn a thick white. Yi Shuang added the loofah, then a little salt and monosodium glutamate. If she added some meat, it would be a killer. Unfortunately, she couldn't, because she didn't have any on hand, so she had to rely on salt and monosodium glutamate to add some flavor. Generally speaking, people in the Cantonese provinces don't add MSG to their soups. If they do, their mothers will hit them over the head with a ladle and yell at them. "You're going to get sick and your taste buds will be ruined." Then they'll throw away the MSG they secretly bought. But actually, MSG is not carcinogenic when used normally. It's just a rumor spread by foreign chicken essence companies when they first entered the Chinese market. And nowadays, if you buy any bottle of chicken essence, the first ingredient on the list is often MSG. It can only be said that this kind of business warfare from decades ago played a fairly significant role in an era when information was underdeveloped. Compared to MSG, the truly terrifying thing has always been human hearts. Recalling his previous encounter, Yi Shuang let out a silent sigh. After finishing the meal, Yi Shuang placed it all on the table, and Bai Yu, sitting in a chair, looked at the 2 dishes and 1 soup he had made for her, and couldn't help but pinch her chopsticks, looking a little overwhelmed. "What's wrong? Weren't you hungry just now?" Yi Shuang asked, seeing that Bai Yu hadn't moved a chopstick. "I can't eat it," Bai Yu said. Yi Shuang froze for a moment, then laughed mockingly. "What, are you afraid I poisoned it?" Bai Yu shook her head, but said, "Anyone who eats with me will be unlucky, so I can't eat first." The smile on Yi Shuang's face gradually froze, and then he asked in a very serious tone, "Who told you that?" Bai Yu's face still had no expression, and she answered in a low voice, "The students in my class." Then she added, "Everyone says so." Yi Shuang was silent for a few seconds, pinched his aching forehead, then pulled up a chair and sat down next to Bai Yu. "They're all talking nonsense. Now that we're talking about science, a pretty girl like you will only bring good luck." "Good luck?" "Yes, eat." Yi Shuang picked up a piece of cucumber and put it in the young girl's bowl. "If you don't believe it, time will tell." Bai Yu picked up the cucumber in her bowl and looked at it for a long time before turning her head to look at the man next to her. "How long will it take?" "Maybe it will only take a second, and my good luck may have already started." Yi Shuang smiled and then began to urge. "Come on, hurry up and eat these tomato and egg dishes. They are excellent when covered on top of the rice." After hearing Bai Yu's words, she put the cucumber in her mouth. The simple salty taste mixed with the smell of the wok, but it was exceptionally delicious. Then she used a spoon to scoop up a mouthful of the scrambled eggs with tomatoes mixed with rice. "Delicious. I'm glad you like it." Yi Shuang just smiled as he watched her eat, as if he were observing a small animal. Suddenly, Bai Yu raised her eyes and asked, "Will you leave here?" Yi Shuang paused for a moment when she was asked this, but still answered, "Of course, we can't live together forever." "Is it because you don't have enough money?" Bai Yu asked. "I still have money, I'll give it all to you." "It's not about money, you'll understand this in the future." After Yi Shuang finished speaking, she noticed Bai Yu's head drop. He was still wearing the same expression, but for some reason, he sensed the girl's lost emotions, and even her eyes, which had originally been without ripples, dimmed slightly. "You want to stay with me forever?" Yi Shuang asked. Bai Yu didn't say anything, just nodded lightly. "Why? We haven't even known each other for a day." "I don't know," Bai Yu whispered. Seeing that the other person couldn't express their true thoughts, Yi Shuang subconsciously reached out and placed a hand on the other person's head. He spoke slowly in a gentle tone. "Don't worry too much about the future. After you've experienced some things, the scenery you see will be different from before." Bai Yu lowered her head, her hair falling onto the table and looking as soft as silk. It just so happened that it was the weekend, so you shouldn't have to go to school, right? Why don't we go out for a walk this afternoon? Yi Shuang smiled as he saw that Bai Yu wasn't in a good mood. Go out? Well, let's go buy some clothes for everyday wear, because it seems like you only have school uniforms. Yi Shuang saw that the girl was a little more interested, so he continued. Bai Yu nodded, and her mood improved considerably. After lunch, looking at the clean plates and soup bowls, Yi Shuang realized that he had underestimated one thing. Bai Yu had a very large appetite. She finished 3 large bowls of rice without changing her expression, and even seemed a little unsatisfied, until Yi Shuang handed over half of his own bowl of rice. You bought such a large pack of instant noodles, and you eat several packs in one meal? It seems like you've remembered something, Yi Shuang suddenly asked. Bai Yu just blinked a little, as if to say, aren't they all soaked together? Goodness, a whole pack at once? Yi Shuang looked at the girl's belly and noticed that it was still as flat as ever. Could it be that this guy is the reincarnation of Cabby the Beast? After noticing that Yi Shuang was looking at her belly, Bai Yu pulled her shirt up to reveal her smooth belly. You want to look at this? Yi Shuang immediately pulled the other person's shirt down and instructed that next time, she was not allowed to do this, especially in front of a guy. Why? There is no reason. Yi Shuang said that he felt that if he wanted to see which part of the other person's body, this girl would take it off without hesitation. Oh. It soon became afternoon, and Yi Shuang took Bai Yu directly out the door. Bai Yu was still wearing her school uniform and followed behind Yi Shuang. In the afternoon, there was a lot of foot traffic outside, and it was very lively with the sound of car horns from passing cars. Yi Shuang noticed that Bai Yu had become even more taciturn. Her expressionless face complemented her cold temperament, giving people an indescribable sense of distance. However, Yi Shuang knew that Bai Yu was not aloof, but was simply not used to crowds. Even as she tried hard to remain calm, her slightly furrowed brows looked as if she were angry. However, there were still quite a few passers-by who cast their glances over. After all, Bai Yu's appearance coupled with her unique temperament was indeed exceptionally eye-catching, at least among the girls Yi Shuang knew. She was in a class of her own. If you don't feel comfortable, just hold on to my clothes, said Yi Shuang. Upon hearing this, Bai Yu extended her slender, white fingers and slightly pinched the corner of Yi Shuang's clothes. As if there was some kind of special magic, her emotions were much more stable at the moment, but her body was closer. At the same time, this scene also attracted the attention of more people, but Yi Shuang didn't care and led the young girl towards a nearby clothing store. Chapter 6: The Truth? Clothing stores near old neighborhoods like this one usually have relatively affordable prices, with all kinds of styles lined up on the shelves. There's no need to go to a big mall to buy clothes. Yi Shuang knew that those clothes are nothing more than 20 yuan to buy in, marked at 1,000 yuan and sold at a discount as a gimmick. It's not as cost-effective as these affordable little shops. How about this dress? Yi Shuang asked, picking up a plain white dress on the hanger. This simple style should suit Bai Yu very well. But thinking back to the countless times his former girlfriend had rejected him because of his poor taste in clothes, he still asked Bai Yu for her opinion. What style do you like? Bai Yu had been looking at the white dress in Yi Shuang's hands the whole time, nodding. You chose well, it looks good. Good boy. Yi Shuang was a little moved. His aesthetic eye was definitely not bad, and someone still understood him. The long, snow-white dress and the long, straight, black-haired, silent beauty were a perfect match. At this time, the shop manager and the matron, who had been outside talking to an aunt about melon seeds, noticed Yi Shuang and Bai Yu and quickly walked over. They casually looked around and saw that all the styles were new and the sizes were complete. However, the next second, the woman seemed to have discovered something, and her gaze kept lingering on Bai Yu. However, the latter did not notice her strange gaze, and her quiet, beautiful eyes looked at the clothes in front of her. Soon, the woman's gaze fell on Yi Shuang, and she asked in a low voice, "What are you to this young lady?" Yi Shuang was also slightly stunned by this sudden question. He first glanced at Bai Yu, and then walked a few steps outward. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? You still haven't answered me, young man. The woman looked at Yi Shuang, her tone a bit like that of an interrogator. I'm not her anything. If I really have to be, I'm the one taking care of her. Seeing that the woman seemed to know Bai Yu, Yi Shuang really couldn't say that he was being supported, so he just made up an excuse. Do you know anything about her? Yi Shuang asked. You young man should be from the community, right? Did you come here without finding out what happened to that little girl? The woman continued. Yi Shuang froze for a moment, but then followed the other person's lead and said, Tell me. Unfortunately, that girl was also a pitiful person. Because she was mentally unstable, her mother kept her locked up in the attic for 8 years. The woman's mouth closed halfway through her sentence. Yi Shuang was about to ask her to continue when he noticed a softness and warmth behind him. Bai Yu appeared behind Yi Shuang, tilting her head slightly. So, did you choose anything you like? Yi Shuang didn't know if Bai Yu had heard their conversation just now, so he immediately changed the subject and asked. Bai Yu was holding the white dress that Yi Shuang had just chosen. This dress has a nice fabric and will be very comfortable to wear. At this time, the saleswoman also said, "Do you want to try it on? There is a dressing room here. Let's try it on." Yi Shuang also pointed to the dressing room not far away at this time. Bai Yu looked at the black cubicle and just asked, "Why do we have to go there?" As soon as she finished speaking, the woman next to her gave Yi Shuang a look that said, "I told you so." But Yi Shuang was very patient and said, "Didn't I say that changing clothes should be done in private, so you need to go there to change?" Bai Yu understood, nodded lightly, and went to change her clothes. Right, that child is not quite right in the head. After seeing Bai Yu go to change her clothes, the woman continued talking to Yi Shuang. She heard her mother say that the girl also had a tendency towards violence, and that she would slash people up with a kitchen knife in the middle of the night. It was terrifying. Her mother had locked her up for fear that she might accidentally hurt someone. Yi Shuang asked, "What about her mother?" "I don't know. I heard that she couldn't stand the torture of her mentally ill daughter and ran away with another man." The woman shrugged slightly. It was 2 years ago, and many people in the neighborhood knew about it. She ran away 2 years ago, and was locked up for 8 years? Yi Shuang opened his mouth. Slightly. She had been locked up since she was 8 years old? Since the community sent you here, you still need to be careful when taking care of this girl, so that you don't get accidentally chopped to death while sleeping. The aunt added. However, Yi Shuang frowned, because during his time with Bai Yu, the girl gave him the feeling that something was not quite right about her, something that came from a lack of common sense, not some so-called mental illness. Suddenly, Yi Shuang thought of a horrible possibility. Could it be that? Was her mother who locked her up for 8 years in the name of mental illness? From the age of 8 to 16, she disappeared, and then 2 years later today. No matter which possibility it is, Yi Shuang feels that his heart is blocked, as if he is being suffocated by a huge stone. At this time, the curtain of the dressing room not far away was also pulled open, and Bai Yu slowly walked out. Her snow-white dress made the young girl look as elegant as a lotus that does not attract dust. Sure enough, she looks good in anything, Yi Shuang said after seeing her. Indeed, when this little girl grows up a bit, she is estimated to have 80% of my strength when I was young. The aunt couldn't help but nod her head. After Yi Shuang glanced at her buck teeth and a mole with a thick hair growing out of it, she suddenly didn't know where to start to complain. Does it fit? Yi Shuang asked after seeing Bai Yu walk over. Bai Yu didn't quite understand the difference between a dress and a school uniform skirt, but she tugged at the dress at her chest. It's a bit tight here. Saying that, she asked, "Can I take off my underwear?" That would be appropriate. No. Yi Shuang immediately refused, and then asked the woman next to her, "Big sister, do you have a larger size?" Yes, this one is indeed a bit small, and the growth of young girls is still very enviable, the woman said with a smile, and then rummaged through the cupboard to bring out a new dress. After Bai Yu changed into it, it was just right this time. Let's buy some pajamas and other things, and just use this size. Yi Shuang then picked up some clothes for daily wear with Bai Yu. Just as Yi Shuang had thought, Bai Yu did not give him the impression of being mentally ill at all, but just ignorant of everything. However, Yi Shuang also discovered that Bai Yu did not even have a mobile phone, which was a very important source of information. Has she always lived with cash? Yi Shuang thought about it for a moment, and always felt that she should still be helped by someone. However, at this time, Yi Shuang did not ask about these things. After thinking that Bai Yu needed a mobile phone, Yi Shuang took her to the store where he had just bought the phone in the morning. Chapter 7, Broken Lock. The girl with shoulder-length hair was no longer in the mobile phone store, replaced by a bald man with a bulging belly wearing a vest. When he saw Yi Shuang and them come in, he immediately stood up enthusiastically and, "What would you like to buy?" "A smartphone," Yi Shuang said, "something affordable will do." Seeing the middle-aged man's enthusiastic expression, Yi Shuang felt at this moment that this was the way a mobile phone store owner should be. If the girl this morning was anything to go by, this store would have to close down sooner or later. Yes, take a look at these iPhones, they are sturdy and durable, have good signal and charge quickly. The boss immediately smiled and introduced the row of iPhones, all of which were affordable phones that girls had used for less than a month. This one only costs 5,999. Yi Shuang heard this and thought of the various problems the girl had mentioned that morning. After picking an excuse that would work, he suddenly fell silent. Let's get an Android, said Yi Shuang. Okay, wait, said the owner, rummaging around and pulling out the exact same phone that the girl had sold to Yi Shuang that morning. This is the latest model, many people buy it, brand new for only 1,800. Yi Shuang was taken aback. So expensive? Oh, no, it's not expensive. It's been this price for years. After the boss saw that Yi Shuang couldn't even come up with 1,000 yuan, his attitude immediately worsened. These affordable phones are hard to come by. They all rely on low profit margins. Don't talk nonsense if you don't understand. Yi Shuang. He suddenly felt that the girl this morning was quite nice. Although her mouth was a bit nasty, she was a conscientious boss. This boss in front of him was smiling, and although his service attitude was enthusiastic, he hated to kill him. Let's look elsewhere then. Yi Shuang took Bai Yuyu by the arm and quickly left the phone shop. We'll go online shopping, and with the speed of logistics here, it should arrive the next day. Damn, what a waste of my time. After seeing Yi Shuang and the others turn around and leave without hesitation, the boss spat out a mouthful and then put the phone back. A few seconds later, he suddenly and suspiciously flipped through the inventory, wondering, why did it feel like one was missing? Never mind, I guess my wife sold it. Yi Shuang, who had left the shop, turned his head and looked at the young girl next to him. He remembered that when buying things, you have to distinguish whether the other person is ripping you off, especially when there is no clear price tag. Bai Yuyu seemed to understand but suddenly asked, is buying someone to support them a kind of buying? Kind of similar? Yi Shuang suddenly didn't know how to answer when asked this. How much do you cost to buy? Bai Yuyu asked curiously. Yi Shuang was a little helpless. Why did this girl always want to possess him? Forget it, she's just young and doesn't know any better. People can't be traded. Yi Shuang said, then led Bai Yuyu back home. But, my mother once said she wanted to sell me. Bai Yuyu's calm words made Yi Shuang pause. Yi Shuang looked at Bai Yuyu blankly for a while, then suddenly squeezed out a smile and said, your mother was just joking, trying to scare you. Really? Bai Yuyu seemed to be thinking back to something, her thoughts drifting off to somewhere else. Well, what do you want to eat tonight? Instant noodles, she answered subconsciously. No. Why? No reason. Just take my words to heart. Yi Shuang said, after all, instant noodles are fine to eat occasionally, but if you keep eating them, your nutrition intake won't be enough. Although Bai Yuyu didn't quite understand, she still obediently nodded her head when she thought about the delicious food Yi Shuang made. Suddenly, her eyes were inadvertently attracted to a mother and daughter passing by, the young mother holding her daughter's hand as they strolled down the street, both of them smiling happily. This kind of affection will never lose to time in a lifetime, but at the moment it was incredibly unfamiliar to Bai Yuyu. The young girl stood there and kept watching, as if she were outside the hustle and bustle of the crowd, clear and cold, as if the sunlight that fell on her had turned into moonlight. It wasn't until they had gone far away that Bai Yuyu slowly looked at Yi Shuang, and then suddenly asked in a low voice, can I hold your hand? Yi Shuang naturally noticed this scene. He looked away without saying much, but just took Bai Yuyu's slightly cold and pale hand, and passed a little warmth from the palm of his hand. He asked, what do you want to eat tonight? Instant noodles. I already said no. Oh. There were a lot of people around, and the two of them walked lightly close to each other, not having too many complicated feelings, just warming each other up in the not cold afternoon. After buying groceries on the way back to the house, Yi Shuang took out the key and tried to open the door. There was a clicking sound from the lock cylinder, and it was still very difficult to open. Not only that, after pulling out the key, Yi Shuang noticed that it was wet, as if it had been exposed to some strange liquid. Yi Shuang frowned slightly. He looked around first, then let Bai Yuyu go inside first. Before cooking, Yi Shuang used his phone to call a locksmith over. In less than half an hour, a middle-aged man arrived. Didn't you just open the lock? The locksmith said, placing his tool bag on the ground. Please take this lock apart, I want to replace it, Yi Shuang said, offering the other person a cigarette. After taking the cigarette, the master placed it behind his ear, smiled, and said, changing the lock, right? Just a moment, I'll go to the car and get a lock. In a short while, the master returned. His technique was very skilled, and in no time at all, he pried open and removed the entire lock. "Your lock is rusted," the master said, sounding a little surprised. "Why does it feel damp?" Yi Shuang lit a cigarette for himself. He first told Bai Yu, who had stuck her head out of the corner, to go back inside and wait, and then continued talking to the locksmith. "Master, take a look at this lock. Was it rusty when someone put it there? The lock cylinder looks pretty new, but the lock is rusted." The locksmith gave Yi Shuang a look. "The lock cylinder is made of copper, so it's fine, but the entire lower half of the lock is rusted, and it's very serious." He lowered his voice and said, "Young man, did you offend someone in the neighborhood and they did this to you?" "I don't think so." Yi Shuang thought about Bai Yu's appearance and asked lightly, "So, this should have been done by someone?" The locksmith wasn't very sure either, but he said that it was likely, otherwise the lock wouldn't have rusted so badly. Someone must have poured something into it. The lock in someone else's decades-old community wouldn't have rusted so badly like this. "Okay, master, you can replace the lock for me first. The lock is 150, and the labor fee is 50. Okay." While the locksmith was installing the lock, Yi Shuang also picked up the rusty lock on the ground. Item, rusty door lock. It seems to have been corroded by chemical agents and can still be used with difficulty. Sure enough. Yi Shuang took a puff on the cigarette in his mouth, and in the haze of smoke, he narrowed his eyes slightly. Chapter 8, Millions in Cash. After changing the lock, the locksmith left. Yi Shuang looked thoughtfully at the small lock opening advertisement posted on the white wall nearby. But soon, his doubts about the small advertisement in his heart were greatly reduced. After all, the liquid traces in the lock cylinder indicated that it was not the first time someone had poured chemicals into it. There are so many households living here, and if it really is the practice of the locksmith to increase customer base, then it is unlikely that he would target this household in particular. Could it be some mischievous children in the neighborhood? Yi Shuang thought about it. He estimated that children would only do something like stuffing paper towels, and it is unlikely that they would do something like tamper with the door lock with chemicals. And reporting to the police is useless. This kind of old community does not even have surveillance cameras, and there is no substantial damage at the moment. Yi Shuang finally felt that it would be safer to install a surveillance camera, but Bai Yu's home did not have an internet cable installed, so he would have to find a way to pull one before installing a surveillance camera. Get a broadband connection, Yi Shuang thought. He felt that both the internet and a computer were necessary if he wanted to live a better life here. When it was time for dinner, Yi Shuang told Bai Yu about this, but the girl didn't seem to understand very well. She just asked, "Does it cost a lot of money?" Yi Shuang heard this and just twitched the corner of his mouth a little, and then he gave Bai Yu a little science lesson about it, but the other person not only didn't have the internet or a mobile phone, there wasn't even a TV at home. In this information age, it's like living like a primitive. Yi Shuang suddenly felt that Bai Yu had been living like this all along, and it's not surprising that she's developed such a personality. "What do you usually do when you get home?" Yi Shuang asked. "Sleep, and then." Bai Yu thought for a moment, pointed to the small bench on the balcony, sat there, and then it would soon be dawn. Countless nights, she spent like this, occasionally able to look at the neon lights and moon outside the balcony. "Isn't it boring?" Yi Shuang looked at the young girl. Bai Yu shook her head gently. She didn't really know what boredom was, because that was how she had always lived. Once, in that small, dark room with only a window that could be opened a little, she would sit by the window, hugging her arms as she waited for dawn to arrive. Sometimes she could just sit there all day. The sun shone brightly as she sat in the dark corner of the attic, listening to the traffic outside the window. Perhaps it was because she was remembering her past experiences, but for some reason, Bai Yu suddenly reached out and grabbed Yi Shuang's sleeve, whispering, "Will you disappear?" They had only spent a short time together, but the young girl had developed strange feelings, and was too awkward to express her true emotions. Yi Shuang looked at her without saying anything, because he found that he couldn't even lie to the girl in front of him with a kind lie. Bai Yu's hand slowly let go. The air was quiet for a while before Yi Shuang said, "I won't disappear." After all, how could a living person suddenly disappear? Yi Shuang thought about it and decided that he wasn't really lying. "Really?" Bai Yu's mood seemed to have improved a lot, and she continued eating the food on the table. Her cheeks bulged as she ate, giving her the feeling of being as cute as a little hamster. After dinner was over, Yi Shuang took a short break and then got the latest news on his phone. Later, he bought Bai Yuyo a mobile phone online. After all, it was for a girl, so he bought a phone with a slightly higher configuration. At a price of more than 3,000 yuan, the entry-level flagship models of major brands can basically be used smoothly. And now the logistics is fast, basically can be delivered the next day. Of course, the surveillance cameras have not forgotten to buy. And in the internet business hall to do a network package, with the master to make an appointment to handle broadband network, Yi Shuang only found that he still has a lot of things to do. Bai Yuyu's family lifestyle is too primitive. Yi Shuang's first priority is to let the child enter the normal rhythm of modern life, and then teach her more common sense and how to access outside information. Yi Shuang didn't know why he wanted to do this either, but he just felt that he couldn't just leave her alone like that. Besides, Bai Yuyu's cash was really not safe at home, so it was better to save it. How much cash do you have? Yi Shuang asked, looking at Bai Yuyu, who was not far away and was about to take off her clothes to go take a bath. Then he added, "Of course, I don't mean anything by it, I just think it's safer to keep the money in the bank. And, don't be naked in the living room." Bai Yuyu innocently blinked her eyes, then silently lowered her skirt. She returned to her room and dragged out a suitcase in no time, which was filled with wads of banknotes, so much that Yi Shuang couldn't believe his eyes. Yi Shuang roughly estimated that there were at least millions of dollars. There was actually so much cash. Yi Shuang was a little skeptical that this was really left behind by Bai Yuyu's mother. "It's too dangerous to keep it at home," Yi Shuang said. Bai Yuyu nodded obediently and held out her hand to push the suitcase in front of Yi Shuang. "It's all yours." Yi Shuang looked at the money in front of him and sighed. "You're just too unsuspecting. Aren't you afraid that I'll take all the money and never come back?" Bai Yuyu tilted her head at him and asked, "Would you?" The question, which seemed to strike at his soul, made Yi Shuang smile helplessly. "You've really got me." Looking at the wads of money in the box in front of him, Yi Shuang thought for a moment, then took out his phone and made a call. After a while, a man's voice came from the other end of the line. "Who?" There was silence at the other end of the line for a few seconds, then an expletive was immediately uttered. "I'll kill you. Where the hell have you been all this time? I couldn't get through to you on the phone. Do you know I've been worried sick about you?" "Okay, never mind that. I need to deposit some money with you, so get me a big deposit certificate." "Deposit money? Weren't you broke after that woman screwed you over?" "The big deposit certificates at my bank start at 800,000 yuan. I can't deposit 1,000 or 2,000 yuan." "I know." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds, and the voice lowered a little. "Have you turned over? Are you being supported by a rich woman?" "I haven't turned over, and there's no need to turn over. I'm also helping someone else save money." Yi Shuang only pursed his lips when he heard the words, "keep a mistress." Then, after looking at the suitcase, he said, "It looks like there are a few million in cash, I can't even lift it." "A few million in cash? You little shit, you're not doing something criminal, are you? Get out of here, I'm innocent. When have I ever committed a crime? I'll give you an address, come pick me up at the bank tomorrow." Chapter 9, The Bubble. The man on the other end of the phone was Yi Shuang's good friend Shanhai, who currently worked as a manager at a major bank in the city and was doing quite well for himself. After dealing with the whereabouts of the cash, Shanhai continued to ask Yi Shuang, "Where are you now? Shall I come pick you up?" "I'm currently staying at someone's house, so don't worry. I'll send you my location on WeChat later, and come pick me up tomorrow." Yi Shuang refused. "Okay, tomorrow at 10 a.m? Okay." After hanging up the phone, a faint body fragrance came from beside her. Yi Shuang turned her head. The long-haired girl beside her was looking at her motionlessly, and almost pressed her face against her. "What's wrong? Are you leaving?" Bai Yuyu reached out and pulled Yi Shuang's sleeve, her hand slightly clenched, and asked. She had just heard Yi Shuang say something about coming to pick her up tomorrow, and she thought Yi Shuang was leaving. "No, I want to deposit all this money of yours in the bank, so it will be much safer," Yi Shuang said, leaning back slightly to pull a little distance between the two of them. "Why don't you go take a bath?" "I want to go with you," Bai Yuyu said. The girl's voice was as light as a feather, and when she begged like that, Yi Shuang couldn't help but cough for a while. But then he thought that if he took advantage of the other person's ignorance and did these things with her, it would be no different from being born together. "It seems that I still need to learn more about the relationship between men and women. Next time?" Yi Shuang could only cope for a while, and then changed the subject by taking out the shower gel and other toiletries that he had bought in the afternoon, telling Bai Yu to use them when she took a bath in the future. Okay. After hearing that Yi Xuan was willing to take a bath with her next time, Bai Yu obediently carried the toiletries into the bathroom. After seeing Bai Yu enter the bathroom, Yi Xuan logged into WeChat with his mobile phone number. As their phone numbers were different, it took a little while to verify his identity before he could log in. Since she hadn't inherited the chat history, there wasn't much in there, and Yi Xuan also sent the location of the neighborhood to Chen Hai. Okay, what time is it? Come out for a late-night snack. Chen Hai quickly sent an emoticon with a funny expression and a squinting eye. You're full, you idiot. The next second, Chen Hai directly made a video call, and Yi Xuan answered it. Chen Hai was a slightly chubby man, with a round body and face, clean short hair and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. At the moment, he was wearing wireless headphones, and judging from the background, it seemed that he was eating in a restaurant. Fuck you, why don't you come to my house when you go to stay with someone else? And whose house are you going to? Chen Hai spoke a bit angrily, but normally when he was at work, he would never say a foul word, and was full of politeness, unlike his true self. After all, everyone in the world lives with a mask, and only in front of close people will they take off their pretenses and be themselves again. The two of them had grown up together, so naturally they would not be too constrained. I definitely can't go to your house, can I? Do I have to listen to you and your wife rocking the bed every day? And your wife is at home, and I'm unemployed, don't you worry about it? At the end of the video, Chen Haitan suddenly snorted in disdain. You think I don't know you? You haven't even said whose house you're boarding at yet. A friend. Yi Xuan said, but in the corner of his eye, he noticed the bathroom door not far away open. White Yu, all wet and covered in bubbles, walked out. Her slender, fair figure was hidden in the bubbles, and she just appeared in front of Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan, these bubbles won't wash off. Yi Xuan opened his mouth. Ha? Why is there a girl's voice? And it's so beautiful, you little shit, you really are being kept by a rich woman, aren't you? In the video, Chen Hai's voice had just started when Yi Xuan hung up. Yi Xuan stood up and pushed Bai Yu, who looked dumbfounded, back into the bathroom. Sit down. There was no choice. Yi Xuan made Bai Yu sit on the chair and took the shower head to wash the bubbles off her body. Even though from this angle all he could see was the smooth back and a little bit of the curved edge under the long hair, Yi Xuan still felt that his concentration was lacking. After pinching the middle of his brow, Yi Xuan began to wash the bubbles off Bai Yu's body. Especially since her hair was very long, reaching her waist, and with Bai Yu having applied a lot of shampoo, Yi Xuan noticed that there were indeed a lot of bubbles in the hair. No matter how hard he washed, there were still bubbles. Unlike men, women basically don't wash their hair every day. Not only is it troublesome to wash hair like this, but it is also more difficult to maintain the hair roots. But Bai Yu's hair was incredibly soft before without shampoo, so it can only be said that she has good genes, and this kind of good hair quality can only be inherited. After rinsing, Bai Yu also noticed Yi Xuan's wet pants, so she reached out and pulled them down. Wait. After a while, Bai Yu, who had already dressed, was thrown out of the bathroom. She sat on the floor in a duck-like position, then turned her head to look at the closed bathroom door beside her. The young girl blinked innocently, then tilted her head. Was she angry? Soon, Yi Xuan also finished showering and came out. He was wearing a pair of underpants and drying his hair with a towel. After noticing that Bai Yu was still at the bathroom door, Yi Xuan said, "Why are you still sitting here? Are you hurt?" Bai Yu asked with a tilted face. "No, I'm not." Yi Xuan was stunned for a moment. Why did this guy suddenly ask that? I can see that your injury is swollen. Yi Xuan. That's not an injury. Come, let's blow dry your hair first. Yi Xuan pulled Bai Yu up, and she seemed to have been sitting on the ground for a while, as her legs were a little numb, and she fell directly into his arms. Are you okay? Yi Xuan subconsciously asked, putting his arm around the other person's waist. The young girl originally had a faint body fragrance of her own, and after just taking a shower, the floral scent was as refreshing as it was pleasant. Yi Xuan didn't know how long he could hold back with this girl who had no sense of distance. Now he could only take things slowly. It's so warm. Bai Yu, however, pressed her face against Yi Xuan's body and then comfortably narrowed her eyes. Yi Xuan could only helplessly smile, and then gently stroked the back of the other person's head with his palm. This child is probably too lacking in love, and Yi Xuan doesn't know what role he is actually playing. After a while, Yi Shuang saw that Bai Yuyu's hair was not drying easily, so he brought a hairdryer to blow dry her hair. Bai Yuyu was unfamiliar with hairdryers. Usually, she would fall asleep with her hair still wet, and the next day, when she went to school, she would always be looked at with strange eyes. "You stink, did your clothes really dry?" This is what Bai Yuyu often heard at school. Although Bai Yuyu didn't understand why everyone said this to her, she just continued to live her life the way she wanted to. When the hairdryer started up behind her, and she felt the warm air on her hair, Bai Yuyu suddenly felt that her life really seemed to have changed. She liked it. Chapter 10, Dare to Dare Alone. The night gradually deepened. Yi Shuang spread out her own cool mat in the living room, but then she noticed that Bai Yuyu had been standing by the bed, still holding a pillow in her arms. She didn't say anything, but her beautiful eyes, as still as a pool of water, kept following Yi Shuang's movements. "You want to sleep together?" Yi Shuang seemed to understand what she was thinking after seeing this, and asked. Bai Yuyu nodded gently. "No, go back to your room and rest," Yi Shuang said. After hearing this, Bai Yuyu had no choice but to hug the pillow and go back to her room. What a clingy guy, Yi Shuang thought to himself, and then tidied his own bed and lay down directly. After the lights were turned off, he lay in bed thinking about his future plans and the future mode of getting along with Bai Yuyu. In the drowsiness, Yi Shuang gradually fell asleep. Yi Shuang was slowly awakened by the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The sunlight was shining brightly, falling on the windowsill and casting a layer of light golden gauze. This feeling was countless times stronger than the sudden cardiac arrest brought on by the alarm clock ringing. It was wonderful to wake up naturally. Ha! Yi Shuang yawned, and as he was about to get up, he felt a slight weight and warmth at the corner of his shoulder, as well as an inaudible breathing sound. Yi Shuang turned her head and found a fair face with rosy cheeks close at hand, seemingly sound asleep. She wasn't on the mat, but lying on the floor tiles nearby. The girl was hugging a pillow in her arms, and seemed to be curled up slightly because of the cold around her. The soft face was leaning slightly against Yi Shuang's shoulder. She wanted warmth, but didn't dare get too close. Holding the pillow, she attempted to feel an embrace she had never received. Yi Shuang. Perhaps it was because she had been staring for too long that even the system's pop-up window slowly appeared. Character, Bai Yuyu. A beautiful girl of ceiling-level beauty, currently sleeping soundly. You might be able to wake her up with a gentle kiss? Yi Shuang withdrew her gaze and slowly sat up. The slight movement also caused Bai Yuyu to open her eyes. She imitated Yi Shuang's posture and slowly sat up. How could you fall asleep next to me? Seeing that the other person had woken up, Yi Shuang asked. Bai Yuyu hid half her face under the pillow, her snow-white legs slightly bowed. She only revealed her eyes and spoke cautiously, I didn't sleep with you, I slept on the floor. You slept next to me even if you didn't sleep on the mat, right? And aren't you afraid of catching a cold sleeping on the floor? Yi Shuang's volume also increased a little. Bai Yuyu looked at Yi Shuang a little helplessly. It took a few seconds before she lowered her head and said, I'm sorry. Seeing the other person apologizing, Yi Shuang's heart twitched slightly, and he also realized that he had used a bit of a harsh tone. He immediately softened his words. I was worried that you would catch a cold. Even if you have to sleep with me, you can't sleep on the floor. Do you understand? It's better if you just sleep with me on the mat. The floor is full of cold air at night, and if you don't use some cushions and just sleep directly, it's easy to get sick. Bai Yuyu looked up, but it was as if she had grasped the point. We can sleep together? Yi Shuang. You really have me beat. After standing up, he helped Bai Yuyu up and said, let's go, first let's wash up. Oh. While they were washing up, Yi Shuang took a comb and helped Bai Yuyu tidy up her hair a little. Seeing such long hair, he asked, do you want to go get your hair cut? Hair this long reaching to the waist is rare these days, and life must not be very convenient. For example, you have to hold your hair when going to the bathroom, and you have to part it before sitting down. Even when you sleep, it can easily get crushed. It would be much better to have medium-length hair. Cut your hair? Bai Yuyu just glanced back at Yi Shuang, unable to read the emotions in her eyes. No, forget it. Yi Shuang quickly dismissed the idea. After all, hair is a girl's life, and he can't make a decision for Bai Yuyu. But with hair as supple as this, all you need to do is take care of the ends. Yi Shuang gathered Bai Yuyu's hair up, then looked at the ends, only to find that there wasn't even a single split. It was incredibly perfect. This Yi Shuang came back to his senses and slowly let the hair down again. All he could say was that Bai Yuyu's appearance was completely flawless, without a single flaw. Okay, I'll go buy some breakfast. After Yi Shuang finished combing Bai Yuyu's hair, he went downstairs to buy breakfast. There is never a shortage of breakfast sellers outside old communities, whether it is the mobile bubble box rice rolls or the buns and fried dough sticks from the small shops, they are all delicious. He chose a bun shop surrounded by a crowd of people. Boss, 3 barbecued pork buns, 2 fried dough sticks, 2 cups of soy milk, and a tea egg. As Yi Shuang finished speaking, the busy figure in the shop casually replied, "Wait a minute, 3 steamed buns and 2 cups of millet porridge and fried dough sticks, right?" The voice was a bit familiar, and it even made Yi Shuang slightly stunned for a moment. He looked carefully at the figure in the bakery. It was a young girl with shoulder-length hair and bangs, wearing a white apron and dressed neatly. "Isn't this the girl who sold him the phone yesterday? It's you?" Yi Shuang was slightly surprised. At this time, the other person also noticed Yi Shuang and asked with a raised eyebrow, "It's you, uncle. What did you say just now? Aren't you selling mobile phones?" Yi Shuang asked instead. "Oh, my sister sells mobile phones. I'm the older sister," she said. "Twins?" Yi Shuang suddenly realized, and then reacted again, "No, didn't you just recognize me?" "Really? You must have heard wrong." The other person did not look away, her amber-colored eyes a little fluttering. "Yi Shuang. It's definitely you. TSK, troublesome uncle. Okay, steamed buns, fried dough sticks, and soy milk." At this time, the other person also packed the things and handed them over. Yi Shuang always felt that if he talked to this strange girl for a bit longer, he would get angry, so he didn't dwell on it and asked, "How much is it?" "Take a look at the prices, I'm not good at maths," said the girl, pointing to the price list behind her. "Remember to scan the QR code to pay." After saying that, she went to pack breakfast for other customers. Yi Shuang was speechless for a while, and suddenly thought that if he just ran away and didn't pay, he would see how arrogant this brat would be. Although this was what he was thinking, Yi Shuang still paid according to the price. Carrying the breakfast, he returned to the house. "Let's eat breakfast first, and then we'll go save the money together later," Yi Shuang said, taking a bite of the steamed bun in the bag. Sesame and white sugar flavor, it's quite delicious." "No, where's my barbecued pork bun?" Yi Shuang took 2 more bites, suddenly speechless. With this guy around, won't the bakery go out of business? While eating the bun, Yi Shuang's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Chen Hai calling. "Hello? I'm in the neighborhood and I've brought a few safes with me." Chen Hai's voice came over the phone. "Is that enough?" Yi Shuang asked. "It's just a few million, no problem," the other party immediately assured him. Chapter 11 Chen Hai. After putting down the phone, Yi Shuang looked at Bai Yuyu, who was quietly munching on a steamed bun, and hesitated whether to ask her to go back to her room. After all, the current relationship between the two of them was hard to explain, and on top of that, Chen Hai was a real loudmouth, and he was really afraid that the guy would scare the child. "My friend is going to come up here later, so why don't you go back to your room for a while?" Yi Shuang considered for a moment before saying to Bai Yuyu. Bai Yuyu's beautiful eyes darkened a little when she heard this, and she lowered her head in silence. "Why are you apologizing?" Yi Shuang was momentarily stunned. Bai Yuyu, however, replied, "If you do something wrong, you have to be locked up." Yi Shuang frowned slightly. "Is that what your mother says?" Bai Yuyu shook her head, however, and then said, "It's not my mother, my classmates all say the same thing. If I do something wrong sometimes, I have to be locked in the toilet and not let out. They say I can only be let out after a day. It's just that it's cold at night and I'm hungry." The girl's narrative was calm, but it made Yi Shuang feel some indescribable oppression, as if the pain was not hers but her own. After she finished speaking, Bai Yuyu stood up and walked towards her room on her own. "Wait." Yi Shuang grabbed her wrist and pulled it next to his. He stood up and slightly bent down so that he and Bai Yuyu could look at each other. Yi Shuang held out his palm and gently cupped Bai Yuyu's face. It was very cold the moment he touched it, but Yi Shuang still looked seriously at the young girl and listened. "Even if you do something wrong, no one has the right to lock you up, and very often, you haven't done anything wrong, understand?" Bai Yuyu's eyes reflected Yi Shuang's face, and she still seemed unable to tell right from wrong very well. "Is that so? You don't believe me?" Yi Shuang asked. "I believe you." "Very well. Yi Shuang reached out and stroked the other person's head, gently like he was caring for a fragile porcelain doll. At this time, a knock came from the door next to them. Coming. Yi Shuang stood up and walked to the door. Behind him, Bai Yu subconsciously touched the warmth that remained on her cheek and just quietly watched his back. After opening the door, Chen Hai immediately cursed and carried a few large safe deposit boxes. There was not even an elevator, and wearing a suit to climb the stairs was exhausting. Okay, saving such a large sum of money is like saying you have no benefits. After Yi Shuang finished speaking, Chen Hai immediately noticed Bai Yu standing behind him. His slightly plump cheeks froze for a moment, and even the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose bridge tilted a little. You. Chen Hai suddenly put his arm around Yi Shuang's neck and walked out, then lowered his voice and asked, "Are you really being taken care of? And by such a pretty girl?" Yi Shuang was about to argue back, but then she realized that Chen Hai wasn't wrong, so she changed the subject. She said, "She's my distant relative, so don't scare her by acting so surprised. She's a bit introverted." "Oh, that's good." Chen Hai let out a sigh of relief when he heard that she was just a relative. "I thought I didn't have a chance." Upon hearing Chen Hai's words, Yi Shuang felt a strange smell. "What do you mean no chance? Do you have feelings for me? Do I look like it? You look like a potato to me." "Damn it, don't pretend to be stupid. You know that Chun Qin has always had feelings for you." Chen Hai's eyes widened. "Now that you've fallen in love, she's been asking me about it all day." "Stop it, let's just move the money and get the job done," Yi Shuang said immediately. "Oh." Chen Hai walked into the room and saw Bai Yu standing quietly in the corner. He immediately said in a friendly and polite voice, "Little sister, I'm Chen Hai, Yi Shuang's brother." Bai Yu nodded, but her gaze returned to Yi Shuang. "Hey, why is your relative always looking at you with that kind of look?" Chen Hai lowered his voice and nudged Yi Shuang with his elbow, "Don't worry about it. Shut up and get to work." Yi Shuang squatted down and put all the wads of money neatly into the large safe. Chen Hai had a lot more questions, but he followed suit and put the money away. After it was all packed up, Chen Hai said that it was estimated to be worth 6 million yuan. However, he did not ask where the money came from. "Did you drive here?" Yi Shuang asked. "Of course." Lifting the heavy suitcase, Yi Shuang couldn't help but sigh. "I suddenly realized that even if money were to fall from the sky, I wouldn't be able to carry much of it." "Nonsense, if money really did fall from the sky, I'd be walking like a champ." Yi Shuang and Chen Hai carried the suitcase full of money, and with difficulty, they managed to carry it to the first floor. Bai Yu followed behind them obediently. Chen Hai's car was parked right in front of the unit entrance, a brand new BMW X5. After putting all the boxes in the trunk, Chen Hai beckoned Yi Shuang to get in the car and set off. After Yi Shuang got in, he saw that Bai Yu was still not getting in the car, just standing there alone looking at him. "Come over," Yi Shuang said. Bai Yu then got in the car, looking so cautious that Yi Shuang couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He really couldn't imagine what this girl had been through. When they arrived at the bank, after spending quite some time counting the banknotes, Chen Hai stood aside and said, "It is indeed 6,110,000, how do you plan to deposit it?" 6 million in a large denomination certificate of deposit, and 150,000 for spending. Yi Shuang said. "Okay, I'll take care of it for you. As for the proof of large cash deposits, you don't need to worry, your card already has a large transaction record." "Okay." Yi Shuang had originally planned to deposit the money into Bai Yu's card, but he discovered that this guy didn't even know what a bank card was. It was troublesome to open a new card for a large deposit, so in the end, it was deposited into Yi Shuang's card for safekeeping. Walking out of the bank, Yi Shuang's mood was slightly complicated when he saw that the balance in his card once again showed a number in the millions. Let this be a lesson from the past, and use these millions to get back on your feet. It seemed as if Chen Hai understood Yi Shuang's thoughts, as he lightly patted his shoulder. "These millions aren't my money, otherwise how could I possibly save it?" Yi Shuang said, and then lit a cigarette and took a drag. Chen Hai asked, "What are you going to do next?" "I want to take some time off." Yi Shuang turned around, his gaze falling on Bai Yu behind him, who still had some things that she couldn't let go of. "That's fine, it's better than disappearing. The most important thing is having the courage to get back up." Chen Hai couldn't help but feel emotional. "By the way, Shen Xin seems to know that you're here with me, and is driving over right now." "Damn, do you want to be my brother-in-law that badly?" Ye's hands shook uncontrollably as he exhaled. Don't blame me. I'll take a taxi home. Yi Shuang said, pulling Bai Yu up and leaving. Hey, being a father is fine too. Get lost. Chapter 12 Chen Xin. Just seconds after Yi Shuang and the others left in a taxi, a pink Porsche also pulled in. A woman in her late 20s got out of the car. She had a pretty face, long brown wavy hair, a business suit and black high heels. The bright red lipstick made her skin look even more porcelain white, and the tear mark under her eye made her look even more sexy and mature. Chen Hai, where is Yi Shuang? The woman stamped her high heels, and as soon as she saw Chen Hai by the roadside, she asked. How come you're here so quickly? Chen Hai was stunned for a moment, and he was still driving in high heels? That's against the rules. What do you care? Where's my Yi Shuang? Chen Xin grabbed Chen Hai's clothes and said, Did you hide her? Chen Hai suddenly looked miserable. I didn't. Didn't you ignore Yi Shuang before? Why are you acting like a crazy girl now that he's broken up with you? Who are you calling crazy, you fat cow? I was just being polite and keeping my distance when someone else was in a relationship. You don't know anything. Well, you are quite tolerant, but I don't know where he went. Can I ask around for you next time? Then give me his new phone number. I don't have it. You're full of shit. Chen Hai felt a little helpless. He couldn't understand why his younger sister liked Yi Shuang so much, and had been secretly in love with him since childhood. The guy wasn't even slightly better looking than him. Looking at the overbearing devil in front of him, Chen Hai thought to himself, Brother, this is as far as I can go to help you. At this time, Yi Shuang had already taken a taxi and brought Bai Yu back to the residential area. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it home. After all, Yi Shuang had planned to live here for a long time, and it was not an exaggeration to call the place where he could accommodate himself home. Although he had not spent much time with Bai Yu, Yi Shuang had already become completely preoccupied with her. How to teach this girl to better integrate into society and live independently had become his goal. The ups and downs of the past had also made Yi Shuang's mentality a lot more open-minded nowadays. In this dance of life, the person who first taught you the dance steps may not be able to stay with you until the end. This seems to be the same for both the guy and himself when it comes to Bai Yu. Yi Shuang didn't know how long he could stay with Bai Yu. Two people with no connection to each other were bound together by fate. And when the knot was untied, it would probably be time for him to leave. But before the curtain fell, Yi Shuang wanted to enjoy the process. At this moment, Yi Shuang had already brought Bai Yu to the market. Seeing the young girl staring at the roasted chickens and ducks, Yi Shuang found her cute appearance quite interesting. Do you want to eat roast duck? Yi Shuang asked. Yes. Bai Yu nodded gently, her usually cold nature showing a rare bit of liveliness. Boss, I'll have the roast duck, the lower half, with plum sauce. The lower half of the duck is called the lower half of the duck, and Yi Shuang wanted about a quarter of it. It looked quite fat, and should taste pretty good. Okay, 26. Yi Shuang took out his phone and scanned the QR code, then showed Bai Yu how to do it. Learning this means you don't have to carry around cash, which is a hassle. Bai Yu seemed to understand but not really. Yi Shuang wasn't in a hurry, however, and then paid at other food stalls a few times to teach Bai Yu how to use the app. In Yishuang City, people basically buy groceries either for one meal or for one day, so he planned to take Bai Yu with him every day when he went grocery shopping. At least learning to buy groceries and cook would be much more nutritious than eating instant noodles. Although ordering takeaway is also an option, Yishuang used to eat takeaway every meal when he was short of time. At the very least, he would learn to cook, which is much more nutritious than eating instant noodles. After buying a simple meal of 3 dishes and a soup, Yishuang led Bai Yu home. During this time, he also picked up a delivery at the rookie's place and bought a SIM card at another phone store. Although the surveillance equipment had not yet arrived, the phone arrived the next day. It has to be said that the speed of the countercurrent courier has always been very good. First, he put the food on the table nearby, then asked Bai Yu to sit next to him, and then inserted the SIM card and started to teach her how to use the smartphone. However, Bai Yu still seemed unable to gauge the right distance to keep from others, and her whole body was almost pressed against Yishuang. The warm slime was pressed against him through the thin clothes, and the occasional touches made Yishuang try hard to calm down and choose to ignore it, and then continue to patiently teach Bai Yu how to use the phone. Okay, try it. Bai Yu took the phone Yishuang handed her and started playing with it. Perhaps these were new to her, and she couldn't put it down for a while. Yi Shuang couldn't help but smile after seeing this, but then, there was a click from beside him. He glanced over and saw that Bai Yu had taken a selfie at some point and even included them in the photo. In the photo, neither of them were looking at the camera. Yi Shuang was smiling faintly, while Bai Yu happened to turn her head to look at him. The scene was frozen in this frame, and such a photo was a bit indescribably harmonious. Delete it. Yi Shuang said, this one isn't very good. But Bai Yu covered her phone and shook her head, no. Why? I want it. Bai Yu said, hugging her phone. Okay. It's probably the girl's first selfie, so she doesn't want to delete it. Yi Shuang got up to cook, and Bai Yu also put down her phone and followed like a little puppy to the kitchen. Just in time to teach you how to cook. Originally, Yi Shuang wanted Bai Yu to play with her phone for a while longer, but when she saw her following, she began to teach her how to cook. Let's start with the simple task of peeling garlic. Yi Shuang demonstrated it for Bai Yu, which was very easy, and Bai Yu picked it up after just one look. As Yi Shuang had expected, Bai Yu did not have a mental illness. She was a very capable learner, and although she might be a bit clumsy, she was definitely a normal person. She just hadn't been taught how to live. Soon, Bai Yu had peeled half a bowl of garlic. She looked at her fingers, which were covered in garlic juice, and subconsciously put them in her mouth to suck on them. The next second, she spat out her tongue because it was so spicy. Ha ha ha. Laughter came from beside her, and Bai Yu turned her head to find Yi Shuang smiling. The taste of raw garlic was still quite stimulating, and she shouldn't just put her fingers in her mouth next time. But seeing Yi Shuang smiling so happily, Bai Yu suddenly felt that her tongue wasn't so spicy anymore, just a little numb. At this time, the afterglow of the sunset shone through the kitchen windowsill, dyeing the kitchen orange while also casting the two of them long shadows that stretched on, until the ends of the shadows overlapped. As if embracing each other. Chapter 13, Entering the House. The night grew darker, and the moonlight seemed to be a hazy veil of silver gauze, adding a touch of beauty to the view outside the windowsill, neon lights in the moonlight, and I wonder who else is starting the day. Yi Shuang sat on the sofa, his gaze fixed on the long-haired girl on the balcony. The night wind blew her hair, and she stood quietly in front of the windowsill, looking up at the crescent moon. Yi Shuang didn't know what Bai Yu was thinking, and even less did he know whether she was looking at the moon or at her former self. Perhaps on countless nights, she had also gazed at the moon, watching its waxing and waning. The young girl slowly turned her head at this moment. In the moonlight, she suddenly asked a question, "What's up there on the moon?" "Nothing." "Can we go up there?" "Not yet, I don't think." "Why do you ask?" Yi Shuang had no idea what Bai Yu was thinking at that moment. "Some people say that when you die, you go to the moon. Will we do the same?" Yi Shuang froze for a moment, then laughed. "There is no such saying, but it doesn't mean it's impossible." "If I die, will I still be able to see you?" Bai Yu asked. "Yes." "Really?" "Death is like a drop of water returning to the water. At the right time, we will meet again." Yi Shuang didn't understand why Bai Yu said these things, but he glanced at the time and it was time to go to bed. "You have to go to school tomorrow, right?" "Yes." Bai Yu went back into her room, but soon came back out again, hugging her pillow and looking at Yi Shuang with pleading eyes. It made him feel a little helpless. "You'll catch a cold." But Bai Yu whispered, "In the morning, you said we could sleep together." Men and women can't be that close, unless they're lovers or husband and wife. Yi Shuang was about to give this girl a science lesson. "Lovers?" "Yes." "Are we a couple?" Bai Yu asked. "No." Yi Shuang answered immediately. "Then are we husband and wife?" "That's even more impossible." "But you said this morning that we could sleep together, so aren't we husband and wife or a couple?" Bai Yu didn't seem to understand, just tilting her head. Yi Shuang was speechless, and Bai Yu's words suddenly fried his CPU. "Sleep here, don't sleep on the floor anymore." Yi Shuang didn't want to dwell on it anymore, and pointed to the empty space on his cool mat. Bai Yu quickly lay down, but still kept her pretty eyes open and looked at Yi Shuang. "What's wrong? Are we husband and wife?" "Go to sleep." "Oh." After Yi Shuang turned off the light, he tucked Bai Yu in, and the other person didn't get too close, just stretching out a hand and pulling his sleeve, then pressing his forehead against Yi Shuang's shoulder. There was a bed, but the two of them slept on the floor. Yi Shuang sniffed the floral scent that wafted up from time to time from the tip of his nose, and couldn't help but ponder the events of these past few days. In the end, all his thoughts converged on the young girl beside him. From the few words she had spoken, Yi Shuang knew that Bai Yu must have been bullied a lot at school, and that just avoiding and tolerating it would not help. Bai Yu was in her third year at Yinshan Academy, a 7-year school. If she couldn't stand on her own 2 feet, then she would definitely not have an easy time in the next few years at school. Students have their own worries. In fact, they are no less than those of adults. Every age has its own problems. Yi Shuang muttered to himself. Forget it, don't think about it. Just as Yi Shuang slowly closed his eyes and prepared to sleep, a clattering sound came from the door handle not far away. Yi Shuang opened his eyes wide. Recalling the previous incident of the door lock being filled with chemicals, he stood up, grabbed the mobile phone next to him and walked towards the door. At this moment, there was a shaking from the doorknob. Yi Shuang opened the phone camera with one hand and then directly opened the door. A man wearing a mask was standing outside the door. When the door suddenly opened, he found that it was not the girl he knew, and his movement paused. Then he pushed the door hard to try to shut Yi Shuang back in. But the man underestimated Yi Shuang's strength. When he realized that he couldn't push it open, he suddenly ran towards the stairs. Trying to run? Yi Shuang was faster, grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him to the ground with a loud thud and a scream of pain. Thief! Yi Shuang shouted as he pinned the man to the ground. The soundproofing in old buildings is poor, and it wasn't particularly late, so Yi Shuang's shout woke up the neighbors on the same floor. Several owners cautiously opened their doors to check what was going on, and when they saw Yi Shuang holding down a man, they came out to help. Let me go! Seeing so many people come out, the man panicked, but Yi Shuang was much stronger and bigger than him, and he was completely unable to move. Let me go, you son of a bitch! At this time, a few more neighbors came over to help, and quickly tied the man's hands and feet with a data cable. Yi Shuang noticed that the man had a toolkit, so he opened it directly and found a series of tools inside, including rope, a camera, wrenches, and a condom. After seeing these things, Yi Shuang's face turned cold, and he slapped him in the face. You broke into my home and molested me, right? I don't think you want to live anymore. Yi Shuang didn't dare to think about what would happen if Bai Yu was really home alone, and she might not even know why someone was always tormenting her. 2 more slaps went on, making the opposite ear buzz. The other neighbors saw the tools the man was carrying, and their expressions were a bit angry at this time. As a neighbor who has lived here for many years, naturally, they also know this pretty girl who lives alone. Although there is no communication at all, they can see what is going on and naturally understand what is happening. At this time, Yi Shuang pulled the other person's mask off directly. Judging from his age, he was just a boy in his 70s or 80s. Isn't this the young man who lives in 703? A neighbor recognized the origin of this boy. I'm not. I don't live here. The boy suddenly became anxious and shouted. Yi Shuang slapped him again, and he yelled, "Shut up, you son of a bitch." He stood up and took out his phone to report the police. At the same time, footsteps could be heard upstairs. While some of the neighbors upstairs came down to eat melons, a woman in her 40s shouted and rushed down. That's my son. You've got the wrong person. He's very good, and his grades are very good. He really isn't a criminal. Chapter 14 Yi Shuang's Ruthlessness. Why are you tying up my son? Untie him at once. The woman shouted, pushing away from the side Yi Shuang, who was standing there. But Yi Shuang just stood there, towering over the woman like a tower, looking down at her with a faint smile, and said, "If you keep talking nonsense, I'll tie you up too. What right do you have to arrest my son?" The woman was not to be outdone, and crossed her arms in a threatening stance. Why? Yi Shuang kicked the tool bag next to him. He broke into my house. Do you think I'm not qualified to overpower the criminal? That's not my son's. At this time, the tied-up boy seemed to have found a savior and began to shout, "It's not mine, I was just passing by here. He beat me up indiscriminately and had someone tie me up." Bai Yu was standing behind Yi Shuang at this time, her confused expression showing that she was a little overwhelmed. Did you hear that, everyone in the neighborhood? This person is framing my son. My son has good grades and is well behaved at school, so how could he possibly do such a thing? I think he just wants to frame my son. He's just trying to extort money. You have to keep your eyes open. The neighbors, who were standing around eating melons, looked at each other, not knowing who was telling the truth for a moment. After all, when they came out, Yi Shuang had already pinned the boy to the ground. However, a neighbor on the same floor as the woman also spoke up. That boy is really very obedient and filial, I don't think he would do such a thing. Is there some kind of misunderstanding? Indeed, at such a young age still in school, he shouldn't be a bad person, right? A female neighbor who also saw a boy the same age as her younger brother being tied up like this said with a little bit of reluctance. Let's just forget about it, nothing happened anyway. Facing the clamor of the neighbors, Yi Shuang calmly lit a cigarette for himself, then leisurely looked at the female neighbor who had just spoken. You're so kind-hearted, so let this man tie you up with these tools and take more pictures for us to enjoy. No, you shouldn't have much to look at with your figure, so I guess you're hoping for someone to come to your door for service? What did you say? The other person immediately glared at him, her face turning ugly. What? You're saying that attempted molestation is fine, but I think you'd like it if someone broke into your house, right? Yi Shuang laughed lightly, but at this point the woman couldn't hold back anymore and slapped him. You son of a bitch. Let go of my son. Yi Shuang didn't dodge, and let the slap land on his face. It was a mutual fight. Yi Shuang didn't care about the stinging pain in his face, and he threw the cigarette but at the man, who let out a cry of pain. The next second, Yi Shuang raised his palm and used all his strength to slap the woman back. The woman screamed and was slapped hard to the ground, where she wailed. Yi Shuang kicked her again, then looked at the female neighbor who had just spoken. What else do you want to say? Perhaps the woman didn't expect Yi Shuang to be so ruthless, and her face turned white as she hurried back inside. The other neighbors couldn't help but think to themselves, this family is really ruthless. For a moment, everyone who wanted to accuse Yi Shuang of beating women shut up. A few minutes later, the police arrived. There was a man and a woman, both of them looking serious. Comrade policeman, this person assaulted our son and I. You have to do justice for us. The woman immediately yelled, he also falsely accused our son of breaking and entering to extort money. The police officers ignored the shouting woman and looked at Yi Shuang, the person involved. You reported the case, didn't you? What exactly happened? Yi Shuang then told them what had happened, especially when the man broke in. The mother and son immediately shouted that it was a lie. Some neighbors who knew the mother and son well spoke up. Comrade policeman, I think you need to interrogate them properly. We have seen this child grow up and we know that he would never do such a thing. Yes, it must be this man falsely accusing the child. He is such a good boy, how could he do such a thing? Yes, he is just a child, and he is about to go to high school, how could he do such a thing? And this man just hit someone really hard, he must not be a good person. Bai Yuyo, who was standing next to Yi Shuang, faced the gazes of many people and could not help but shrink her body, and her body could not help but tremble. Yi Shuang protected her behind his back. After facing the accusations of those people, he didn't care at all, but looked at the two policemen and said, I have evidence. Saying this, Yi Shuang played the video that he had just recorded on his phone in front of everyone. In the video, it recorded the sound of Yi Shuang's door lock being pried open, and the process of opening the door and bumping into the man and the other party throwing down their tools and trying to escape. Although the phone was a bit cheap, the recorded video process was still clear. It was not at all what they said, just passing by and then being falsely accused. As soon as this video came out, the shrewish woman was instantly speechless. Her already swollen half-face turned even redder and warmer. Even the neighbor who had just helped speak up felt as uncomfortable as if she had eaten a fly, her face burning with pain. Especially since they had just looked so convinced. That was really the size of an ID card imprint, and if they weren't clowns, they were all clowns. This video is definitely fake. The woman quickly shouted as she saw the atmosphere was not right. If it's fake, we'll know for sure at the police station, right? Yi Shuang raised an eyebrow slightly, then looked at the two policemen standing nearby and said, arrest him. Without any further ado, the two policemen untangled the data cable wrapped around the man's neck and escorted him away. Let's go. You and his family will also have to come with me to the police station to make a statement. Okay, Yi Shuang nodded. After all this, Yi Shuang looked at the young girl next to him, but she was staring at him motionlessly. Yi Shuang thought that Bai Yuyu was scared. Don't be afraid, I'll be back soon, you go home and sleep first. Bai Yuyu, however, continued to look at Yi Shuang. She suddenly raised her arm and gently touched the place where he had just been beaten with her finger. Her eyes, which were staring at the reddened spot, had ripples in them. Does it hurt? It seemed that she was more concerned about whether Yi Shuang's beaten cheek hurt than about her own feelings. The girl's fingers, which brought a little coolness as they stroked her cheek, also made the pain there subside quite a bit. Yi Shuang shrugged and smiled. I'm fine, but that woman is going to have a bruise that won't go away for at least half a month. Wait for me when I get back. I'll wait for you. Bai Yu nodded obediently. Yi Shuang patted her little head tenderly and then closed the door. After getting into the police car, it was a few hours later after the statement was taken. The man also confessed to the crime under the Great Memory Recovery Technique. He saw that Bai Yu was pretty, and since it seemed like she lived alone, he got some evil ideas. Moreover, he heard from others that Bai Yu was a fool, so he took a chance. Chapter 15 I only treat you as a sister. When he came out of the police station, the air was slightly chilly. Yi Shuang left the gate and was thinking about how to go home when he saw a car with its lights on and a slightly plump figure leaning against it not far away. Why are you here? Yi Shuang also froze for a moment when he saw Chen Hai. It was such a big deal, and he had seen it by accident. Chen Hai said, tossing over an aluminum can. When he took it, he saw that it was a bottle of Tsingtao beer. Yi Shuang opened it and took a sip. It was quite cold. That's right, I have a fridge in my car. Chen Hai said, and opened the can in his hand. Drinking and driving right in front of the police station, have you got some nerve? This is guava juice. Chen Hai shook the green bottle in his hand, and the printed words were indeed not beer, as they were held by his hand. After looking at Yi Shuang and smiling, without saying anything more, Chen Hai turned his head and asked, I heard you hit someone? What's so strange about that? It seems like I haven't seen you hit someone for many years. Have you ever seen a leader hit someone? Ha, that's right. I thought you were going to be locked up. For this kind of minor scuffle, at most you'll be fined and educated. As for that guy, he'll probably be locked up for 3 years. Yi Shuang said with a light smile. Talking to people requires different approaches. Sometimes you need to use a little harsh medicine, otherwise everyone will think you're easy to bully. When dealing with people who throw a tantrum and roll around, fists are actually the best approach. Chen Hai did not disagree with this, and looking at Yi Shuang, who was deep in thought, he suddenly asked, still thinking about that woman? Yi Shuang lit a cigarette and did not answer, but instead asked, why do you ask? No. I just feel that you won't be able to get over it so easily. You know, I understand you, buddy. Yi Shuang did not say anything, and after a while, he slowly exhaled a puff of smoke and said leisurely, that was never my moon, it was just the light of the moon shining on me for a while. Are you willing to accept that? There's no point talking about this. Nothing in the world is perfect. Yi Shuang said, and for some reason, he thought of Bai Yu. He laughed and shook his head, looking on with detachment. Hey, why don't you just go for Chen Qin? She's the standard beautiful rich girl, and you don't want to see her go to someone else. Chen Hai came over grinning. I treat her like a sister, you know that. Yi Shuang pushed Chen Hai away with his elbow. She doesn't consider you a brother, she's always considered you her husband, and she's pretty and sensible. Go away, I'm going back. So early? Buddy, let's go soak your feet. Call your wife? Forget it, she'll tear me apart. After getting into the car and quickly returning to the residential area, Yi Shuang greeted Chen Hai and walked to the front door of the apartment building. Looking up slightly, he saw that the lights on one balcony were still on. Yi Shuang looked at the only lit balcony and couldn't help but take another look. It was already 3 or 4 in the morning, and even the brightest neon lights in the city were gradually cooling down. The bright light in front of him, however, gave Yi Shuang a sense of warmth like finding a port in a storm. Maybe it's not bad to live like this? Yi Shuang thought to himself, and then walked into the apartment building. He took out the key and opened the door. In the bright interior, Yi Shuang's gaze met a pair of eyes. Directly in front of the door, there was a young girl sitting in a chair. Her face was slightly resting on the backrest, and her eyes were full of an unconcealable drowsiness. However, the moment she saw Yi Shuang, her eyes lit up, and she stood up. You are back? Why aren't you asleep yet? Yi Shuang didn't expect Bai Yu to still be awake either. He had thought that the other person was just turning on the lights to go to sleep. Bai Yu stood in front of Yi Shuang, tilting her head slightly. You told me to wait for you obediently. She hesitated a little. Did I do something wrong? No, you didn't do anything wrong. Don't always think you've done something wrong. Yi Shuang reached out and ran his hand through the other person's hair, saying, Okay, go to sleep. Oh. Bai Yu was indeed sleepy, and fell asleep as soon as she lay down, but she still held onto a corner of Yi Shuang's shirt, as if that was the only way she could feel a little bit safe. Yi Shuang tucked her in, looked at the girl's snow-white face with a hint of pink, and smiled silently. Good night. Early in the morning, Bai Yu woke up. She touched her stomach and looked a little dazed. I'm hungry. Walking to the kitchen, Bai Yu skillfully went to get some instant noodles, but she found that someone was already standing there, using a frying pan to cook something. The sun was shining brightly, and the warmth spread across his back. At this moment, the aroma of the frying pan filled the air, and it also made Bai Yu wake up a lot. Perhaps she felt that the scene in front of her was too illusory and unreal, so she couldn't help but slowly extend her hand towards the other person. Ha! You're awake. Yi Shuang also turned his head and waited, watching as I flipped the fried egg. With these words, the pan in his hand skillfully flipped the egg over, making a sizzling sound. Is it cool? Ha! Bai Yu's gaze was fixed on Yi Shuang's body the whole time, and her body pressed up against him, even burying her face in Yi Shuang's chest. I'm covered in grease, go wash up. Yi Shuang saw this and threw the girl into the bathroom. When Bai Yu came out after washing up, Yi Shuang's breakfast was ready. His breakfast was also very simple, with fried eggs and bacon sandwiches, about 7 or 8 servings. The bread slices were also fried in butter, and Yi Shuang felt that there was nothing wrong with the taste. As for why he made 7 or 8 servings, the sight of Bai Yu, whose cheeks were puffed out like a hamster, had already eaten 6 servings in 10 minutes. Sure enough, he is a big eater. How will you solve lunch, eat at school? Yi Shuang asked. There should be a canteen, right? At noon, no. Bai Yu shook his head, however. Why? Yi Shuang was stunned for a moment. Bai Yu, however, lowered his head. The canteen does not accept cash, so at noon, his stomach will be hungry, unbearable. No cash? Yi Shuang frowned and wanted to say something, but suddenly remembered that when she was at school, she swiped her meal card. Could it be that Bai Yu didn't know how to swipe her meal card and was refused when she gave cash? Did she not charge her meal card? Bai Yu nodded. She didn't know where those cards came from, she just knew that everyone had one, and no one was willing to tell her. Over time, Bai Yu stopped going to the cafeteria and spent lunch hours drinking water. Your big appetite is completely from hunger. Yi Shuang suddenly sighed. If you skip a meal, then you'll eat a big dinner of instant noodles, and your stomach will get sick. Looking at the girl's slightly sickly pale face, Yi Shuang smiled and said, Right, I'll go to school with you today. Bai Yu blinked, then tilted her head. Chapter 16, A Reliable Adult. Half an hour later, Yi Shuang and Bai Yu appeared outside the school. Yi Shuang's attire was also a bit different. He had changed into a more formal outfit and was wearing silver rimless glasses, which made him look much more refined. Go, said Yi Shuang. Bai Yu didn't know what Yi Shuang wanted to do, but she still nodded lightly and walked towards the school with her satchel. However, after a few steps, she couldn't help but turn around and look back. The girl could only see Yi Shuang smiling at her. At this time, many students had already entered and exited the school gate. Bai Yu hesitated for a moment, then turned around and walked towards the school gate. After seeing Bai Yu's figure gradually disappear into the crowd of students, Yi Shuang waited for a few minutes, then walked in the direction Bai Yu had left. At this time, there were several students in charge of discipline inspection standing at the school gate. After Yi Shuang walked over, they all said hello to the teacher. Good morning. Yi Shuang nodded and walked in. This composed and calm appearance made it seem like Yi Shuang really was a teacher, but it was indeed the case. There were many teachers at Yinshan Academy, and it was impossible for the student disciplinary officers and security guards to know all the teachers, not to mention the fact that every year there were new teachers joining and leaving. Moreover, Yi Shuang's refined appearance and the time of day he appeared made him seem more like a student than a teacher. Classmate. Yi Shuang casually stopped a female student, gave her a gentle smile, and asked her something. The female student was taken aback. Perhaps it was because she thought Yi Shuang was a bit handsome, her tone suddenly became a bit stammering. Do you know where to apply for a meal card? I didn't know very well on my first day of work. Yi Shuang asked. The meal card. The female student looked a little disappointed, and then pointed to a building not far away. There is a window on the first floor of the cafeteria where you can recharge and replace meal cards. Thanks. Yi Shuang winked and walked towards the cafeteria. This new teacher is so handsome, I wonder if he teaches our 3rd grade. The female student muttered as she watched Yi Shuang's departing back. What are you standing here gawking at? A lazy voice came from not far away. The female student turned her head and found a beautiful young girl with shoulder-length hair standing behind her. Excitedly, she said, Xiaoyu, I just saw a really handsome teacher. It seems like he just started working here, and he asked me for my meal card. I wonder which grade he teaches. Upon hearing this, and Shiyu's eyes widened. How handsome. Very handsome. The female student gave a thumbs up. You should read more, or you won't even know the words to describe a handsome guy. And Shiyu put her hands in the pockets of her skirt, not really interested. Oh yeah, I haven't finished my homework yet, lend it to me to copy. What? You tell me to read more, but you don't even do your homework. I'm in the top 3 in my grade, so it doesn't matter if I do my homework or not. You? I don't care, lunch. Okay. The two walked back to class side by side. If Yi Shuang had walked one step later, he would have definitely recognized the girl with shoulder-length hair as the one who sold him the phone and buns. What Yi Shuang didn't know was what had happened after he left. At the moment, he had already arrived on the first floor of the cafeteria. After a quick glance, he found the location where you charge your meal card. There was a line at a window. Yi Shuang went to the end of the line. There weren't many people, so he estimated that he would probably be able to get to the front of the line in no time. Good morning. Standing in front of Yi Shuang was a female teacher, who greeted him politely when she saw him. Good morning, Teacher Chen. Yi Shuang also responded easily, pushing his glasses up and smiling. Ha! Perhaps it was being called by his surname that made the female teacher flinch for a moment, and then embarrassment appeared on her face. I've seen you before at a meeting. My surname is Bai. Yi Shuang just continued. At this moment in front of his eyes, there was still a faint window. Character, Chen Yu. Third year B homeroom teacher at Yinshan Academy, Chinese teacher, loves to fart. Really? I'm sorry, Teacher Bai, there are just so many teachers at school. Chen Yu's expression became even more embarrassed. The other person could call out her name, but she had no idea what the other person's name was. But such a handsome male teacher, she should have an impression of him, Chen Yu thought, and suddenly felt that she needed to get a pair of glasses. Teacher Chen, I remember you're the Chinese teacher for the third year class, right? Yi Shuang continued chatting with her. Yes, and you? I teach mathematics. Yi Shuang casually changed the subject, continuing to dominate the conversation. Teacher Chen, do you know a student called Bai Yu in the third grade? Bai Yu, from class A, right? Chen Yu's expression at this time obviously showed that she knew Bai Yu's name, and she then asked, I know, what's wrong? She is the child of a distant relative of mine, and I was just curious if you knew her. Oh, you also have the surname Bai. Chen Yu nodded, and the student named Bai Yu was a bit of a loner, and there were some bad rumors about her. What rumors? Oh, those students like to make up rumors. Bai teacher, don't mind them. Chen Yu seemed to realize that she had said the wrong thing, and she smiled awkwardly, as if she didn't want to continue. It's okay, I just want to know a little bit, can you tell me? Yi Shuang leaned in a little, smiling gently. Chen Yu looked at the other person's smile, and her heart skipped a beat. She felt a little embarrassed and looked away, and then, just then, she said that the student's father was a murderer and his mother was someone's mistress. Then, Chen Yu came to her senses and felt that she shouldn't have said those things. She immediately explained, Teacher Bai, you also know that students at this age like to make up these rumors, and they won't listen to teaching. That's right, the older they get, the more difficult it is to discipline them. Yi Shuang didn't show any emotion, just smiling faintly. Yes. I'll charge a meal card first. Soon it was Chen Yu's turn. She looked at Yi Shuang apologetically, then bent down to charge her meal card at the window. After charging her meal card, Chen Yu left the line, not forgetting to say to Yi Shuang, Teacher Bai, I'll go back and lead morning reading first. Okay, bye. After saying goodbye to the other person, Yi Shuang looked at the woman at the meal card window. Hello, I'd like to apply for a meal card. A replacement or a new card? A new card. The card costs 50 yuan. How much do you want to charge? The woman at the window didn't ask any more questions. After all, she heard the female teacher just call him Mr. Bai, and no one would have thought that someone would come to apply for a meal card by pretending to be a teacher. 2000, Yi Shuang said with a smile. Upon hearing this, the woman looked up at Yi Shuang and then pointed at the QR code next to her and scanned it. Yi Shuang directly charged the meal card with 2000 yuan. After doing all this, Yi Shuang, who was now holding the white card, pushed the flat-framed glasses on her nose and said, "Well, it's time to go check on the third-year students." Chapter 17, Stinky Girl. Bai Yu hung her head low, with the bangs falling in front of her forehead slightly concealing her eyes as she walked. She arrived at Class 3A. As soon as she walked in, the previously noisy room became a little quieter, and many people's gazes were cast over. Why does that girl seem cleaner today? Who knows? Maybe she finally decided to take a bath. Ha, you're not wrong. Maybe even the heavens couldn't stand her dirty appearance, because it rained over the weekend. The surrounding people did not hide their laughter at all, but for Bai Yu, it was just an everyday occurrence. She walked to the end of the seats, where a table was placed all alone, so eye-catching compared to the other tables, which were placed 2 by 2. The table was covered in miscellaneous items and rubbish, and even the chair was nowhere to be seen. None of the miscellaneous items or rubbish belonged to Bai Yu. After placing each item on the floor, she found a chair with a broken leg in the classroom where the trash cans were located. Bai Yu wondered why everyone treated her like this. Did I do something wrong? Bai Yu asked herself countless times. I did something wrong. Bai Yu said this to herself countless times. Hey, you stupid girl, why did you put my stuff on the floor? At this time, a girl walked up to Bai Yu's desk and kicked her desk with her foot. Bai Yu looked at the things she had just put on the floor and hesitated. Which one? What do you care? Pick them all up. I'm sorry. Bai Yu silently picked up the rubbish on the floor and put it back on her desk. Ha ha ha, you really picked up the trash, you idiot. The girl suddenly laughed, then it seemed like she remembered something. Oh yes, there is still a cleaning duty today. Stinky girl, you do it for me, remember to clean it up. After saying that, the girl returned to her seat. Wooya, this person is quite good at ordering Stinky girl around. On the other side of the classroom, 2 boys were communicating. Right? One of the boys looked at this scene, but his gaze kept lingering on Bai Yu's profile. Hey, HA, what are you daydreaming about? You said that Bai Yu is quite pretty, don't you think? She has very fair skin too. The boy called HA said. Who knows, that brat keeps her head down all day and she stinks. You're not falling for her, are you? No, who would like a stupid girl? Ah, HA is going to woo that brat, give him some encouragement. The boy suddenly shouted. The whole class burst into laughter and then shouted, together. Ake immediately stood up excitedly, who the hell would like her? Ha 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 ha. Bai Yu looked up at this scene slightly puzzled, and then lowered her head again and waited quietly for the start of the lesson. The lesson started soon after, and the homeroom teacher entered the classroom and began the routine class meeting. When he saw Bai Yu's desk full of rubbish, he frowned and his tone became displeased. Bai Yu, how many times have I warned you not to leave your trash all over your desk? You're an adult, can't you even clean up after yourself? At this, there was a burst of giggles in the class, but Bai Yu just looked confusedly at her desk. After a few seconds, she said quietly, I'm sorry. The trashy girl is more trashy and more suitable. Some of the students giggled. The homeroom teacher pinched his eyebrows, feeling a little depressed. He really envied other homeroom teachers. Not only did his class A have a lot of things to do, but there were even problem students like Bai Yu who couldn't understand what people were saying. The most critical thing was that the other party didn't even have a guardian, so he didn't even have the opportunity to greet the other party's parents. Okay, everyone be quiet and continue the class meeting. The last class in the morning was gym class, and according to the requirements, you need to change into your gym clothes before going to class, but Bai Yu was stopped outside the locker room at this time. Stinky girl, you can't come into our changing room. We don't want to smell your stink, said one girl, righteous and resolute. We've told you many times, you're not allowed in. Bai Yu hugged the gym clothes in her arms, about to say something, but all she got was the sound of the door slamming shut. Bai Yu looked at the clothes in her hands, and then silently took off her school uniform and put on the gym clothes at the door. The other girls who came out of the changing room seemed to be used to seeing Bai Yu changing clothes in the doorway. After all, the whole grade knew that there was a weirdo in Class A who didn't wear underwear and liked to change clothes in the doorway of the changing room. When PE class was over, when all the students rushed to the cafeteria like unbridled wild horses, Bai Yu quietly went to the rooftop of the teaching building and sat next to the fence. Because some students were taking their lunch break in the classroom, they asked Bai Yu not to stay in the classroom so as not to disturb them. Why can't I take my lunch break in the classroom? Bai Yu sat on the ground with her knees in her arms, her beautiful eyes looking at the sky. She didn't understand anything. But more than that, Bai Yu couldn't help but rub her stomach. After the gym class, the hunger became more and more intense. Usually at this time, Bai Yu would go to the water dispenser to quench her thirst and cope with her hunger, but she didn't do that today. Perhaps it was because she remembered the figure that had prepared breakfast for her this morning, and the warm voice. I'm so hungry. I'm so tired. Unconsciously, Bai Yu only felt that the scene in front of her was a bit blurry, and an inexplicable uncomfortable feeling welled up in her heart. She buried her face in her knees. What should I do? At this time, on the other side of the rooftop, in the shadow of the building, Yi Shuang was leaning against the wall smoking. Ha! Yi Shuang naturally saw everything that happened to Bai Yu, and after thinking that this was just her daily life or even just the tip of the iceberg, Yi Shuang felt a little at a loss for words. After extinguishing the cigarette in his hand, Yi Shuang looked at the white meal cart in his hand and walked directly towards Bai Yu. Perhaps hearing the footsteps approaching, Bai Yu looked up slightly and met a pair of familiar eyes. As if she didn't quite believe her own eyes, Bai Yu subconsciously rubbed her reddened eyes. Why? Yi Shuang just crouched down and then smiled slightly, sneaking in. Have I done something wrong? No, you haven't done anything wrong. Really? Really? Do you believe me? Yi Shuang asked. Bai Yu nodded seriously, I believe you. Whenever you doubt yourself, just remember what I said. Yi Shuang also said seriously, you haven't done anything wrong, just trust your instincts. Yi Shuang reached out and pinched the other person's soft little face. As for the rest, I'll help you solve it. Chapter 18 Antly. It was 4 p.m., the end of the school day. Sweep the classroom clean, if it's not up to standard, you're dead tomorrow. Wu Ya threw the broom in her hand at Bai Yu before leaving the classroom. Wu Ya, ready? At this time, there were also girls waiting for her outside the classroom. Coming, where are we going tonight? Wu Ya immediately asked with a smile. Karaoke, we've made a date with the handsome guys from the university next door. Wow! Wu Ya and her friends' voices gradually faded as they left, and Bai Yu looked at the broom on the ground and bent down to pick it up slowly. Trust your instincts. For some reason, Yi Shuang's words at noon seemed to be imprinted in her heart. I shouldn't be doing this. Bai Yu thought, why is she doing this? Her hand tightened slightly around the broom. At this moment, a voice came from the side, let me help you, so we can finish early. Bai Yu turned her head, but she saw that it was a boy, also a classmate, but Bai Yu did not know the other person's name. Why? There is no why, I just can't stand seeing them bully people. The boy scratched his head, but looked around a little embarrassed. After confirming that there were no other students in the class, he continued. This is really excessive, leaving all this work to you. Bai Yu shook her head lightly. Why are you just standing there? Let's start cleaning. You sweep the floor and I'll mop. Luo Che saw Bai Yu, who had been keeping her head down, and urged her a little. But as soon as he finished speaking, he saw Bai Yu lift her head and say, I can't clean. At that moment, a breeze blew from the windowsill, and the bangs of the young girl were swept aside, revealing those quiet eyes like obsidian. The face hidden beneath the bangs was too beautiful, and Luo Che's expression momentarily lost its focus. This is not my job. You? Luo Che opened his mouth. Why is she so beautiful? Therefore, I don't need to do this. Bai Yu's voice trailed off as she walked to the corner of the room and slowly put down the broom. After picking up her bag, Bai Yu left the classroom directly. Just before leaving, the girl's voice entered his ears like a breeze. Thank you. Luo Che stared blankly at her receding back, then chased after her, slowly. Well, that should be about right? Yi Shuang was standing at the entrance to the teaching building, and happened to see Bai Yu walking down the stairs. Let's go. Yi Shuang gave a faint smile. Bai Yu nodded, then reached out and grabbed the hem of Yi Shuang's clothes. The two walked out of the school gate. Get in the car. There was a black motorcycle parked by the roadside at the school gate, and Yi Shuang took off a helmet and handed it to Bai Yu. Bai Yu didn't know where the motorcycle came from, and just stared at the black motorcycle in a daze. It wasn't until Yi Shuang signaled her to put on the helmet that she snapped it onto her head. Everything went dark. Idiot, you're wearing it backwards. Yi Shuang tapped the small head in front of him. After putting on the helmet and protective gear again, Yi Shuang asked Bai Yu to sit on it, and then started the motorcycle. Hold on to me. As Yi Shuang finished speaking, Bai Yuyu's entire body pressed against his back, and her warmth and softness were transmitted to him. It's too tight. Oh. Although Yi Shuang said this, Bai Yuyu still didn't let go. Yi Shuang didn't care either, and drove the motorcycle directly out, the surrounding scenery rapidly reversing. The girl's head rested against Yi Shuang's back, but she also noticed that they weren't on the way home. But Bai Yuyu didn't care, she just quietly closed her eyes, because leaning on Yi Shuang's side made her feel an unprecedented sense of security. Yi Shuang was at this time focused on driving, looking ahead. This motorcycle was lent to him by Chen Hai, and it was quite expensive. Although Chen Hai said to just trash it, Yi Shuang didn't want to break the precious bike he bought without telling his wife. After entering the underground garage of a commercial plaza, Yi Shuang took Bai Yuyu to the third floor of the mall. This was Bai Yuyu's first time in such a place. After seeing the crowds of people around her, she subconsciously reached out to take Yi Shuang's hand. It's quite crowded. Yi Shuang noticed her unease and took her hand, leading the way. Feeling the warmth in the palm of her hand, Bai Yuyu nodded gently. In front of a barber shop on the third floor, Yi Shuang stopped and glanced at the sign. Welcome, is it a haircut? Or a styling? A woman at the reception desk was smiling as she asked. Is your manager here? Yi Shuang asked. Yes, you. I'm his friend. Yi Shuang said, and a voice that was squeaky with emotion came from a distance. Oh, little Shuang, long time no see. Yi Shuang was suddenly embraced, and the strong smell of perfume hit him in the face, which made him twitch his mouth corners. Bai Yuyu, who was standing nearby, also looked at the scene in a daze. She saw that the man hugging Yi Shuang was wearing tight purple and green leather pants. He had dyed white hair, diamond pendants hanging from his earlobes, and was wearing black lipstick. His every word and action showed his charm. Okay, stop messing around. Yi Shuang pushed the man away and introduced him to Bai Yuyu. His name is Li Fu. Naughty. The man put a finger over Yi Shuang's mouth, then smiled at Bai Yuyu and. Kid, call me Auntie Li. Bai Yuyu subconsciously called out, Auntie Li. Good boy. Auntie Li. Immediately burst into giggles, then circled around Bai Yuyu, occasionally lifting her arm and taking a look at her figure up and down. Finally, when he reached out and lifted the bangs of the young girl's hair, he seemed a little surprised and said, Oh, it's really pretty, this face, but it's all ruined by these bangs. Well, what if she gets older? After Adli finished speaking, she glanced back at Yi Shuang and said, So, is this the purpose of why you brought this child to me? More or less. Her hair hasn't been cut in a few years. It's up to you, Fu Gue. No, call me Li Tian. Okay, Fu Gue. A few minutes later, Bai Yuyu was taken to wash her hair. On the shampoo bed, she lay there looking at Yi Shuang not far away, her blinking eyes looking somewhat innocent. Adli skillfully scrubbed the young girl's hair, and it also made many of the store staff turn their attention to her. Although there were celebrities who came to the store manager for styling, they had never seen the store manager personally wash hair before, and they couldn't help but wonder who Yi Shuang and Bai Yuyu were to the store manager. Your hair is really good, but why do you still have lumps in it? Aunt Li said, as if she had felt something in the hair. That was burned by someone with a lighter. Bai Yuyu said calmly, as if she were stating something that had nothing to do with her. Aunt Li froze for a moment, and the smile on her face slowly faded. She turned her head and looked at Yi Shuang, who was just giving her a wink. It's okay, I'll give you a pretty hairstyle later. Chapter 19, Idiot. After washing her hair, Bai Yuyu sat in front of the mirror, while Aunt Li stood behind her, using a hairdryer to dry the young girl's hair. With one hand cupped to her face, she seemed to be studying how to do it. Yi Shuang, who was standing nearby, said, Fenggue, you can't do it at your level? Nuisance, who said I can't do it, it's just that this child was born with too good a condition. So? It means that she doesn't need to style her hair much to look very beautiful. Aunt Li smiled, a perfect piece of jade, every carving is a waste. Saying this, he used scissors to clean some of Bai Yuyu's burnt hair, and then began to repair the ends of her hair again. It's been a long time since I've seen hair of this length and quality. It can fetch a good price. Back when I was an apprentice at the barber's, I always wanted to lure in people with long hair, just so I could keep it and sell it. After all, when I was an apprentice, the salary wasn't much, just a few hundred. Oh, I'm just joking with you, you look better with long hair. Yi Shuang was not surprised to see Li Fugue chatting with Bai Yuyu like an old married couple. He took out a cigarette, and even before he took out his lighter, the other person's voice came out from in front of him. Xiao Shuang, smoking is prohibited in our store. Yi Shuang's mouth twitched. Through the mirror not far away, he noticed that Bai Yu and Aunt Li were both looking at him. Okay. Yi Shuang had no choice but to put it away. At this time, Aunt Li continued, it's about time you quit smoking, too, right? It's a bit difficult. Yi Shuang just smiled. When smoking, you still have to consider the feelings of others. You have to know that secondhand smoke is not harmless. Aunt Li said, pointing at Bai Yu, would you be willing to let such a cute girl smell the smell of smoke on you? Yi Shuang had no choice but to say, I understand. At this time, Aunt Li was also concentrating on taking care of Bai Yu's hair. She was very gentle, basically fixing Bai Yu's original hairstyle, simply thinning it out a bit, and then shaping her heavy bangs to make her face look better. After about half an hour, Aunt Li put down the scissors, gently swept away some hair with a sponge, and it was done. Yi Shuang glanced over, but was slightly taken aback. After a few seconds, he gave a faint smile, not bad. Bai Yu in front of the mirror didn't seem to be much different from before the haircut, and it was even the same hairstyle. But just a simple touch-up of the ends and bangs made the whole person look completely different. With this appearance, no matter which angle you look at, there are no dead ends. Just as Li Fugue said, a perfect piece of jade, no matter how it is carved, is a waste. It's really pretty. Aunt Li couldn't help but praise. Bai Yu didn't seem to understand the meaning of pretty. She looked at herself in the mirror and it seemed like there really was something different about her. Why not contact a company and audition to make her debut? She has such good conditions. Aunt Li said, giving Yi Shuang a wink. You're good at this. Yi Shuang ignored the other person's gaze and just said slowly, let's talk about it later. At this age, she can make her own choices. Why are you like a father? After fixing Bai Yu's hair, Yi Shuang looked at Aunt Li and asked, how much? It must have cost you a lot to get personally involved. 50,000. A discount, 5. Nonsense, it's 5 then. Aunt Li covered her mouth and laughed, then looked at Bai Yu, as if she were admiring a work of art. My child, what is your relationship with him? Bai Yu tilted her head slightly when she heard Aunt Li ask her this. Husband and wife. Yi Shuang, who was standing nearby, was suddenly taken aback. Oh? Aunt Li also narrowed her eyes, as if she had discovered some interesting gossip. Not husband and wife. Yi Shuang stood behind Bai Yu and directly pinched her cheeks and pulled them to the sides, afraid that the girl would really convince the other party if she continued to talk nonsense. But, we sleep together. Bai Yu said, turning her head, you said that husband and wife sleep together. Xiao Shuang, come, tell me. Aunt Li, who was standing nearby, immediately came over and put her arm around Yi Shuang as if she was very interested. Let's chat about sleeping, oh he. Yi Shuang pinched her aching brow. After leaving the barber shop, Yi Shuang led Bai Yu around the shopping center for a while, and then bought some daily necessities to go back with. Bai Yu's outstanding appearance combined with the subtle adjustments she made immediately attracted a lot of attention, but the girl herself was oblivious and just silently walked holding Yi Shuang's hand. Everyone is looking at you. Yi Shuang looked at the scene and smiled slightly. Why? Because you are very beautiful. Yi Shuang continued, come on, lift your head up, be confident. The warmth transmitted in her hand seemed to encourage her, and Bai Yu slowly lifted her face. Her fair and cold face immediately made many people stare. Bowing your head may protect you, but only by lifting your head. Yi Shuang gently stroked the girl's head with both palms. You can see the road ahead. Bai Yu turned her head, but her gaze kept lingering on Yi Shuang's face. Why are you looking at me? How can we become husband and wife? The young girl's words suddenly made Yi Shuang flinch, but then he gave a gentle smile and wait until you can truly stand on your own, can handle difficulties and summon courage. Bai Yu asked, so, we are husband and wife? Yes. Yi Shuang nodded. Do husband and wife always live together? Yes. However, there was something Yi Shuang didn't say, and when that time came, Bai Yu might understand the true meaning of husband and wife. In that case, Yi Shuang would be able to rest assured. When he got home, Yi Shuang started to cook. After learning about Bai Yu's appetite, Yi Shuang bought a lot of ingredients that night. I'll help. Bai Yu followed him. After seeing this, Yi Shuang said, you're tired from class today, go rest. Bai Yu, however, remained standing in the same place, her beautiful eyes looking at Yi Shuang. If she could just stand on her own, she would be able to become his wife a day earlier. Yi Xuan was momentarily stunned, but then laughed and said, "Okay, I'll teach you how to use a knife today." After demonstrating once, Yi Xuan handed Bai Yu the knife and said, "Here, you try." Bai Yu took the kitchen knife, raised it high, and the bright blade glistened. Paired with her expressionless little face, it was enough to make anyone believe that she was killing and dismembering someone. Idiot, no one uses a knife like that. Chapter 20, A Gap of Youth. After dinner, Yi Xuan also began to unpack the express delivery that had arrived today. It was actually something like a computer. After all, if you were going to live here for a long time, a computer was a necessity, and the internet had already been installed. Yi Xuan skillfully installed the computer, and after noticing that the screen was lit, he went back to the door to install the surveillance camera. Bai Yu saw that Yi Xuan had been busy back and forth, so she wanted to come over and help, but since she couldn't help, she could only quietly stand aside and watch Yi Xuan. During this time, a neighbor passed by and saw Yi Xuan installing the surveillance camera here. He didn't seem surprised at all. After all, this had just happened. He heard that the son of the family on the 7th floor was still being held captive, and after a while, he would be prosecuted and go to jail. That's about it. After Yi Xuan fixed the surveillance camera in the corner and affixed the words "You are now within the surveillance range," he finally felt a lot more at ease. In fact, the biggest significance of surveillance is not video recording, but deterrence, so fake surveillance is also quite popular online. Back in the house, Yi Xuan locked the door and glanced at the surveillance video on his mobile phone. After finding that the function was normal, he nodded and said, "Okay." Then Yi Xuan started fiddling with the computer again, while Bai Yu sat on a small chair next to him and watched him. She didn't understand what Yi Xuan was doing. But just being by his side was enough to make the young girl feel at ease. Yi Xuan saw that Bai Yu had been sitting next to him the whole time, so he said, "Go take a shower first. You must have sweated during gym class today. Let's take a shower together." Bai Yu, however, grabbed Yi Xuan's sleeve. When she saw that he wasn't going to respond, she asked, "No?" Taking a shower together is something that only a husband and wife can do. Seeing that he was so attached to her, Yi Xuan had no choice but to say. Bai Yu let go of his sleeve, and her eyes, which were like jewels, drooped. Even the stray hairs on her head hung down listlessly. Yi Xuan sensed her partner's lost mood and thought for a moment, before saying, "Let's go." "Are we husband and wife now?" Bai Yu asked, tilting her head curiously. "No, as a reward for how well you behaved today," Yi Xuan said. But after saying this, Yi Xuan looked at the pretty face of the young girl in front of him, but he didn't know if this so-called reward was for her or for himself. Bai Yu seemed to understand, but she didn't quite understand. But as long as they could bathe together, that was fine. A few minutes later. In the bathroom filled with white water vapor, Bai Yu sat on a small stool, while Yi Xuan was behind her, washing her hair, rinsing it, and then applying shower gel. "Raise your hand." "Oh." Yi Xuan continued to apply bubbles to Bai Yu. After a while, Bai Yu suddenly turned around and pointed at her chest, saying, "Here, no bubbles." "Yi Xuan. Bubbles." The young girl continued. He had no choice but to reach over and help apply the bubbles evenly, suddenly feeling a sense of guilt. Bai Yu saw Yi Xuan in a daze, just blinked a few times, then leaned over and asked, "What's wrong?" The bubbles were almost rubbing against his body, and Yi Xuan had repeated to himself hundreds of times, "I wasn't born." The next moment, his eyes suddenly became crystal clear. "Here, I'll rinse you off." Yi Xuan's voice even had a hint of an announcer's at this time, full of positive energy. "Oh." After the shower, Yi Xuan dried Bai Yu's hair with a hairdryer, looked at the other person's fair neck, and pondered that such things could not be done again. Yi Xuan was well aware of their age difference. 8 years. It was not just a difference in age, but also a gap of youth. Bai Yu did not understand many things, but he did. Yi Xuan did not want to ruin the girl's future because of his own selfish desires. "Bai Yu. Ha?" Bai Yu turned back. "Come here, let's watch a science film about the knowledge of men and women." Yi Xuan sat at the computer desk and, after searching for a science film on the video website, beckoned Bai Yu over. "Men and women are different, you can't just bathe and sleep together." Bai Yu sat obediently next to Yi Xuan and watched the video with him. After about half an hour, with the end of the video, Yi Xuan said to Bai Yu, "So, did you understand the knowledge in there?" Bai Yu nodded gently. "Do you know the difference between men and women?" "Yes." Yi Shuang let out a small sigh of relief, as long as she understands. Bai Yu looked at Yi Shuang with those big eyes and said seriously, I will only show you these things in the future, and I will only bathe and sleep with you. Yi Shuang. No, you really understood? The video said that these things can only be done by the closest of couples. Bai Yu said. We're going to be husband and wife, and I'll only do it with you. This logic seems to be completely fine, but instead, Yi Shuang couldn't find any words to refute her, and couldn't say a sentence like we may not be husband and wife in the future. Forget it, let's learn the rest first. Yi Shuang found a movie. After all, in terms of learning knowledge, watching movies is the most interesting, and humans' memory of scenes is much stronger than that of words. After watching the movie, the night gradually deepened. Bai Yu hugged a pillow and knelt on the floor, as if she wanted to sleep together. Yi Shuang let her be and turned off the lights before lying down with her. The floral scent of the young girl was transmitted to him at this time. In the dim room, Bai Yu had already leaned against Yi Shuang and fallen asleep, and was now emitting a steady breathing sound. Yi Shuang, however, was now looking at the ceiling with his eyes open, with scenes from the past lingering in his mind. Suddenly, he felt his craving for a cigarette. Yi Shuang got up quietly and planned to go to the balcony to have a smoke, but the next second, he noticed that his clothes seemed to be being pulled. Through the faint moonlight, Yi Shuang noticed that Bai Yu's hand was firmly grasping his clothes. She likes to pull my clothes when we sleep. Yi Shuang couldn't help but smile. Just as he was planning to slowly pull apart the other person's fingers, at the moment of contact, a little strength came from the other person's fingers, along with the girl's murmuring voice. Don't leave. I'll be good. Yi Shuang froze for a moment. He was silent for a while, then sat up and reached for his lighter. After lighting a cigarette, he couldn't help but ponder what had happened to Bai Yu's body. Father is a murderer, mother is a mistress? Regardless of the truth of this rumor, what is the truth? Cough cough, a cough interrupted Yi Shuang's thoughts. He slowly came back to his senses, noticing the wispy white smoke in the moonlight and the girl's slightly frowning face of discomfort. It seemed that he had thought of something someone had said, and Yi Shuang's gaze fell on the cigarette but in his hand, which was almost completely smoked. He slowly raised his hand, and took another drag. After doing so, he threw the cigarette case in his hand into the trash can along with the lighter. Let's quit smoking starting today. Yi Shuang thought to himself. Chapter 21, maybe this is not a bad idea. The next day. When Yi Shuang woke up, he only felt a little numbness in one of his arms, as if he had lost feeling in it. Slowly turning his head, he saw the sleeping girl was resting her head on his arm. Her long eyelashes fluttered gently with her even breathing. Yi Shuang didn't know why the two of them ended up in this position. Maybe it was just that he was used to hugging people in his sleep. After all, he had once been asked to hug the other person while sleeping. Yi Shuang recalled what had happened in the past, and suddenly felt an indescribable depression in his heart. He felt in his pocket for a cigarette, but then remembered that he had already thrown them away in the trash can last night. One last drag. After the craving hit, Yi Shuang felt ants crawling all over his body. He reached out to go rummage through the trash can, but stopped when he heard the girl's indistinct mumbling in her sleep. Slowly lowering his hand, Yi Shuang laughed at himself and gave up. It's always the last drag. Is it really someone else or myself that I'm deceiving? He slowly withdrew his other arm, which was numb, from under Bai Yu's body, and after washing up, he went straight out the door. The temperature in the morning was a little low. After buying breakfast, Yi Shuang seemed to have remembered something and stopped at a stationery store on the corner of the street. After thinking about it, he went in. Where is the notebook? It seemed that the door had just been opened, and there were not many customers inside, so Yi Shuang looked at the girl at the counter and asked. The girl at the cash register, who was looking down with her head bowed, didn't even look up. Second row, back row. Yi Shuang went to the back row and a second-hand laptop appeared in front of him. Yi Shuang. It's either a laptop or a regular notebook. As soon as Yi Shuang finished speaking, he saw the girl slowly raise her head. At the moment their eyes met, they almost spoke at the same time. Is that you? It's you. Aren't you selling mobile phones and buns? Why are you here in the stationery store? Yi Shuang asked, a little surprised. What's going on with this guy? Or does he own all three stores? It seems like there's no way to hide it anymore. The girl with shoulder-length hair slowly stood up and said lightly. I'm a trainee ninja who has been practicing for 2.5 years. The two you saw are all fake bodies created by the art of shadow duplication. Yi Shuang saw the other person's serious expression, and after his mind went blank for a few seconds, he suddenly twitched the corner of his mouth. Do you think I'll believe that? Humph, you didn't fall for it? And Shiyu crossed her arms and looked away, revealing an expression of, obviously so gullible. You wrote your innermost thoughts all over your face. TSK. At this time, Yi Shuang also noticed the Silver Mountain Academy school uniform the other person was wearing, and curiously asked, Are you also a student at Silver Mountain Academy? And Shiyu immediately revealed a look of vigilance. Oh? How did you know? Were you following me? She looked Yi Shuang up and down, as if she were inspecting him. After a moment, she shook her head. We're not a good match, you're too old for me. Who's following you? You're the one wearing the school uniform. And Shiyu's expression froze, and then she sighed. You've noticed. Yes, I'm a high-level ninja sent to infiltrate Inshan Academy. You remember your own setting? And didn't you just say you were a trainee ninja? After spitting out his words, Yi Shuang didn't want to get tangled up with this guy anymore, but instead continued, I need a notebook. Here, 5 yuan. The other person took out a notebook. Is there a smaller one, preferably something I can carry around? Yi Shuang asked, looking at the 2 palm-sized notebooks. Here. The other person handed over another palm-sized notebook, and then Yi Shuang bought a few pens before leaving the stationery store. As he watched him leave, and Shiyu propped up her small face with one hand, wondering what he was thinking. Yi Shuang returned home and found Bai Yuyu still asleep. She was sleeping very soundly, her round, straight thighs pressed against the quilt, her loose clothes flapping in the morning sun, a bit blinding. The quilt is really white. Yi Shuang looked away, then went to the balcony and gathered up all of her clothes. At this time, Yi Shuang suddenly noticed the opening in her school uniform. Item, Inshan Academy Girls' School Uniform. The clean clothes were filled with the smell of sunshine, and it seemed that the seam had opened. Yi Shuang took out a needle and thread from the drawer next to her, and then sat on the small bench on the balcony to sew up the open seam. Listening to the birds chirping outside the window, Yi Shuang stitched the open seam of the school uniform again and again, and he suddenly found that his heart had calmed down. This kind of mood seemed to have disappeared for a long time. Since graduating, Yi Shuang had not been carefree like this for a long time. He didn't need to stay up late preparing for work tomorrow, nor did he need to set his alarm clock to go off every minute on the hour, or keep his phone on 24/7. He didn't need to race against the clock, nor was he being pushed along by it. It seemed like this was pretty good, didn't it? Yi Shuang looked at the brand new school uniform in his hands, and felt the morning breeze blowing gently on his face outside the window. At this moment, a faint sound came from behind him, and Yi Shuang turned around. Bai Yuyu had already woken up. She slowly sat up with sleepy eyes, as if she hadn't yet come back to her senses. Up already? Yi Shuang walked over and said, I bought you 5 buns today, so go wash up and have breakfast quickly. Bai Yuyu. While saying this, Yi Shuang also took out the school uniform he had just repaired and said, Here. At this moment, Bai Yuyu was still a little confused. After seeing the clothes in Yi Shuang's hands, she took off her pajamas. The scene of the small branches bearing fruit made Yi Shuang feel another headache, and he got dressed. Bai Yuyu just tilted her head, and under the pressure of Yi Shuang's gaze, she slowly put the clothes on. However, Bai Yuyu, who was fully dressed, kept looking at herself in a sitting duck position, as if she wanted to say something. What's wrong? Yi Shuang thought that Bai Yuyu was still not fully awake. Bai Yuyu, however, held out her hands, and with a rare hint of coquettishness in her voice, she wanted a hug. Upon hearing this, Yi Shuang looked at the other person's open hands, and he had no choice but to half crouch down and embrace the girl's soft body in his arms. The warmth of the body and the floral scent of the hair ends gradually calmed Yi Shuang's heart at this moment. It's so warm. Bai Yuyu muttered, and she rubbed her face against Yi Shuang's shoulder. Yi Shuang did not say anything, but gently stroked the back of the other person's head. At this moment, the soft body in his arms made Yi Shuang feel an unprecedented sense of security. Perhaps hugs can give people strength. Why did I fall asleep again? Chapter 22, Stuck. Hey, Che, why are you so distracted in the morning? Have you fallen for the girl in the next class? Luo Che came to class early today. He sat in his seat, his gaze occasionally resting in the corner of the classroom. When faced with his classmates' teasing, he suddenly glared and shouted, Bullshit! At this time, his mind was full of the beautiful face under Bai Yuyu's bangs yesterday, so that Luo Che kept thinking about it after going back last night, and he almost couldn't sleep. Stinky girl, no, Bai Yu is actually this pretty? Am I the first to notice? Luo Che was thinking at this time, but there was a sense of surprise like winning the lottery. Moreover, she thanked him yesterday, which means that he shouldn't have a bad impression in the other person's mind. If I can help her more, maybe I can tap into this potential. Luo Che thought, perhaps he was too excited, causing his legs to tremble uncontrollably. Such a pretty girl. But she is the stinker girl. If I really get together with her, will I also be discussed by other classmates? Just as he was in a daze, a faint floral fragrance passed by. A figure slowly walked to the corner of the classroom and sat down. Is that the stinker girl? What's going on? At this time, half of the students in the class, when they saw Bai Yu sitting in the corner, suddenly looked stunned, as if they had discovered something incredible. The girl sat quietly, but no longer with her head down. Her eyes, framed by her bangs, were quiet and as beautiful as jewels. Her clothes were clean and tidy, and she looked like a different person from before. What the hell? How can she be so beautiful? Some of the boys suddenly swore, and their eyes could hardly be taken off Bai Yu's body, almost like they were going to stare into a stupor. Some of the girls also started whispering, as if they had no idea what had happened to the bratty girl. At this moment, Bai Yu didn't care about the reactions of her classmates around her. She took out a small notebook from the pocket of her pleated skirt, which Yi Shuang had given her in the morning. She flipped open the first page. There were lines of words written on it. 1. Lift your head and look people in the eye when communicating. 2. When encountering something you don't want to do, firmly refuse, similar to don't do it, don't go. 3. Don't say sorry. 4. When there is a conflict, express your thoughts and look the other person in the eye. 5. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the one at the end of the corridor next to the teacher's office. 6. If you encounter something you can't solve, call me. 7. Don't be inferior, you are prettier than anyone else. 8. Don't care about verbal attacks. 9. Don't let others touch your body. 10. To be added. Reward for good behavior, choose between a bath or sleeping together. After Bai Yu had quietly made a note, she put the notebook away. At this time, she naturally felt the stares of her classmates in the class. But it seems to be different from before. Bai Yu didn't understand. She just needed to do what Yi Shuang asked, and Bai Yu took out a white meal card from her pocket. Starting today, you can go to the cafeteria to eat. Damn it, didn't you clean yesterday? A sudden angry voice resounded in the classroom, and Bai Yu glanced sideways. She saw Wu Ye walking over angrily and kicking Bai Yu's desk hard. Accompanied by the loud sound of the desk shaking, Wu Ye was about to speak, but she froze for a moment. Because the person in front of her seemed completely different from her impression. Who are you? Wu Ye asked immediately after seeing that it was not the smelly girl. Bai Yu. Who is Bai Yu? A new transfer student? Wu Ye felt that the name was very familiar, and then suddenly reacted, and the impression of the young girl in her mind began to overlap with the beautiful young girl in front of her. Why has she changed so much? What happened? She didn't go get plastic surgery, did she? Wu Ye saw Bai Yu's pretty face, and for a moment, she only felt jealous. Didn't I tell you to clean up yesterday? Compared to Wu Ye's violent temper, Bai Yu remained calm, and just said in a leisurely manner. Why should I do it? Wu Ye was momentarily stunned by this rhetorical question. This guy dares to argue back? Even being stared at by the other party's eyes like this, Wu Ye suddenly felt a little bad. The atmosphere began to become a little awkward. For some reason, the students who had always spoken up in the past also didn't say a word at the moment, just watching this scene. Damn it! Wu Ye couldn't stand the sudden change and reached out to push Bai Yu. However, Bai Yu remembered Yi Shuang's words in the little notebook, not to let others touch her body. She leaned slightly to the side, and Wu Ye missed her target, losing her balance and falling hard. Ah! At this time, Bai Yu just looked at her, without even the slightest expression. The cold, condescending look made Wu Ye feel indescribably uncomfortable. Okay, stop fighting. At this time, Luo Che suddenly stood up and walked over to stop the fight. The teacher is coming. Seeing this, the other boys also walked over. Some girls helped Wu Ye back to her seat, while the boys went to care about Bai Yu. Are you okay? Did Wu Ye hurt you just now? The boys, who had never felt anything for Bai Yu, suddenly seemed to have all turned into warm-hearted big brothers, and began to care about whether Bai Yu was okay. However, it was obvious to anyone with a discerning eye that only Wu Ya had fallen hard, but Bai Yu was completely fine. And when Bai Yu faced everyone's concern at this time, she just felt an indescribable sense of awkwardness. It was all obviously concern, but why did Yi Shuang's concern make her feel comfortable? Bai Yu's head couldn't react for a while. It so happened that the bell rang for class at this time. The class teacher, who had an unhappy expression on her face, walked in. After telling everyone to go back to their seats, she slammed her hand on the desk and asked who had been on duty yesterday and why the hygiene score had been deducted. There was dead silence in the classroom. The next second, Wu Ya immediately spoke up, blaming Bai Yu. The class teacher's gaze immediately fell on Bai Yu in the corner, but she was slightly stunned because the girl in the corner no longer had her head bowed. For a moment, the class teacher thought she had mistaken someone. But he still frowned and said, "Bai Yu, stand up." Bai Yu slowly stood up when she heard this. "Why didn't you clean up? How many times do I have to tell you before you can let me stop worrying? How can you, an adult, be worse than a child?" Wu Ya saw this and felt secretly happy. When Bai Yu didn't say anything, the homeroom teacher continued, "I need a reasonable explanation from you." At this time, Bai Yu spoke. "Why wasn't the classroom cleaned?" Instead of bowing her head in apology, the young girl looked at the homeroom teacher and directly stated her thoughts. "Because yesterday's class monitor was not me." The homeroom teacher immediately said, "Not being the class monitor is no excuse. Even if." The next second, his voice came to a sudden halt. "Huh? You weren't the class monitor yesterday?" Suddenly, the homeroom teacher's expression froze. Chapter 23, He's the teacher? Not the monitor? The homeroom teacher's expression was very awkward at this moment, and all kinds of words that he wanted to lecture her with were stuck in his mouth, and he was forced to hold them back. Well, yes, although I'm not the monitor, but caring for the environment is everyone's responsibility. Even because of this inexplicable embarrassment, he began to talk nonsense. Looking at the young girl standing in the distance, the homeroom teacher suddenly took out his phone. He said, and the homeroom teacher walked out of the classroom, not returning until several minutes had passed. He coughed lightly, as if nothing had happened. Seeing that Bai Yu was still standing, he said, "Bai Yu, you sit down first." "Oh." Bai Yu sat back down, and the homeroom teacher swept his gaze over all the students below, asking, "Who was on duty yesterday?" "Wu Ya." At this time, a classmate also spoke up. In an instant, the homeroom teacher's gaze rested on Wu Ya, and her tone was tinged with anger. "Since you were on duty, why are you blaming Bai Yu?" It's all Bai Yu's fault, I even let her clean." Wu Ya stuttered, scared by the sudden momentum. "Stand up." The homeroom teacher slammed the table, and Wu Ya immediately bounced up. "Who do you think you are to let your classmates do your chores for you? Who do you think you are to be so arrogant?" Wu Ya was speechless. She stood there at the moment, unable to do anything but bow her head in the face of the homeroom teacher's interrogation. Meanwhile, the stares of her classmates felt like thorns, stabbing her skin. "It's all that brat's fault. What right does she have? If it weren't for her." Wu Ya thought this to herself, before turning her head and glaring fiercely at Bai Yu. But Bai Yu was looking at the pamphlet in her hands, and her gaze never once strayed Wu Ya's way. This feeling was like punching a bag, making Wu Ya even more frustrated. "Where are you looking? Starting today, you will be responsible for all the chores for the next month. Don't even think about slacking off, because if you fail one day, you will have to work an extra week." "Huh?" At this moment, Yi Shuang was walking past Class A with a teaching plan in his hands. Naturally, he had just seen everything that had happened in the classroom, and his gaze fell on the young girl in the corner. It was clear that just one day apart had made a world of difference to the girl's appearance. Once the seed of confidence is planted, many difficulties that once seemed insurmountable will no longer seem so. He pushed his flat-rimmed glasses up his nose and didn't linger long. After all, he was just passing through, and if he stayed here too long, people would start to get suspicious. Besides, in a few days, this game of pretending to be a teacher would be over. Teacher Bai. Teacher Bai. As he reached the top of the stairs, a voice suddenly came from behind him. Yi Shuang paused, and when he looked back, he saw a familiar face. "Oh, it's Teacher Chen." The teacher in front of him was Chun Yu, who had been in line with him to charge his meal card before, and the two of them had had some exchanges. "Teacher Bai, do you have a class in the second period?" Chen Yu asked hurriedly. "No," Yi Shuang said after thinking for a moment. Chen Yu's eyes lit up at this, and she immediately said, "Yes, that's right. There's been a situation at my house, and I need to go home to deal with it. Because it's so urgent, I can't find a substitute teacher. Can you cover a class for me? Just let them study on their own." Yi Shuang suddenly regretted saying that she didn't have any classes. But it was just a study hall class. Should be okay, right? "Okay, Miss Chen, which class is it?" Yi Shuang asked. "Class B." "Thank you, Miss Bai." After that, Chen Yu thanked her again and hurriedly left, as if she was in a hurry to catch the high-speed train. What kind of thing is this? Pretending to be a teacher and actually having to teach a class. Yi Shuang couldn't help but think to herself. She might even have a bit of talent as an agent. After half an hour or so, with the second bell ringing for class to begin, Yi Shuang also walked into Class B with her lesson plan in hand. The originally noisy class instantly quieted down, and they all turned their attention to her. "Your teacher Chen has something urgent to take care of at home, so this class will be a self-study session." Faced with dozens of pairs of eyes, Yi Shuang's ability to hold their attention was nothing short of miraculous. After he finished speaking, he sat down at the podium and started playing with his phone. To be precise, he pretended to write lesson plans while actually playing with his phone. The other students, knowing that their homeroom teacher had left, acted like runaway horses, and suddenly the entire classroom was as noisy as a market, not giving the new teacher the time of day. After all, he's only here to teach one self-study class, so it doesn't matter. Yi Shuang was a little speechless after seeing this scene. It was so noisy that it was estimated that it would attract the attention of the class monitor or the like, and by then, his disguise as a teacher would probably be revealed. It would not be easy to enter the school next time to see what happened to Bai Yu. Thinking about this, Yi Shuang thought about it for a while, and then his gaze fell on a boy who was sitting on the table chatting with his classmates. "Su Hao, sit back in your seat." Yi Shuang slowly spoke. The classroom was quiet for a moment, as if no one had expected a teacher with a strange face to actually recognize the students in the class. But the boy named Su Hao just smiled disdainfully, then made an expression of raising the corners of his mouth, thinking he was handsome. He was already a diehard in the class, and thought he was famous among the teachers as well. So he wasn't at all surprised when Yi Shuang shouted out his name. But the next second, Yi Shuang's words made his face turn pale. "If you don't go back to your seat, I'll tell your grandmother about your excellent performance at school." Yi Shuang continued to speak in a neutral tone. Character, Su Hao. Was brought up by his grandmother since childhood. He has a stubborn personality but listens to his grandmother very much. He even lied to make her happy, saying that he was a good student who could get scholarships at school. At this point, Su Hao is even more confused. After all, his grandmother doesn't even have a mobile phone, and she hasn't even been to a single parent-teacher meeting. The contact information for the parents also says divorced parents. How did the teacher know? But Su Hao didn't dare to act rashly, and immediately obediently sat back down in his seat and quieted down. The class was quieter, but there was still a girl who was applying foundation with a cosmetic mirror on her face with a carefree expression, and then turned her head to laugh with the classmate behind her. Yi Shuang took out his phone again and took a few photos of the girl. "Zhang Shuyi, I have recorded your outstanding performance and plan to send it to your father in the hospital to see. I hope you can get more pocket money next month." As soon as the words fell, the girl's face suddenly turned white. The class fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. They knew that this substitute teacher might be even scarier than their old teacher. He didn't shout to maintain discipline like their old teacher, but those few words were as effective as a warning to the students. All the students lowered their heads and began to study on their own, with the exception of a young girl with shoulder-length hair. And Shiyu twiddled the pen in her hand and muttered to herself. "He's a teacher?" Chapter 24, Cell Phone, Buns, Stationery, and a Student Girl. A class lasts 40 minutes, and for Yi Shuang, it's easy to pass the time by casually checking her phone. During that time, the teacher on patrol came in to take a look, but seeing that there was a teacher on the podium, he left. With the ringing of the end-of-class bell, Yi Shuang stretched, then got up and left the classroom. I wonder how Bai Yu is doing. Feeling thirsty, Yi Shuang went directly to the vending machine on the first floor. After scanning the code and paying, Yi Shuang pressed the button for cola. Ha! After 3 or 4 seconds, the vending machine, apart from the screen saying it was dispensing, seemed to have jammed. Don't waste your time, that vending machine is broken. A voice came from behind him, and when Yi Shuang turned around, he saw a familiar face. Mobile phone, buns, stationery, student girl. Quite a few titles. Seeing In Shiyu appear behind him, Yi Xuan was not surprised to see her. After all, he had just seen her in Class B. For this girl who he had met a few times, Yi Xuan just pretended not to see her. You are not a teacher at Inshan Academy, are you? As soon as In Shiyu spoke, Yi Xuan was momentarily stunned. Why do you say that? Yi Xuan asked. How come I am not a teacher and I came here to substitute for your class? It's simple. Because I have a good memory and I won't forget a face I've seen before. And Shiyu said. You're really conceited when you talk like that. Yi Xuan looked at In Shiyu, and then the other person's information slowly emerged. Character, In Shiyu. Hyperthymesia patient, you might as well kiss her to make her remember you for the rest of her life. Yi Xuan looked at it for a few seconds, and then he suddenly smiled and said, but I'm the new teacher. This year, Inshan College only recruited one teacher, and she was a woman. Besides, this kind of thing can be easily verified with the personnel department. After In Shiyu finished speaking, she said expressionlessly, Uncle, you don't want anyone to know about pretending to be a teacher, do you? Yi Xuan looked deeply at the girl in front of him. In the end, he didn't say anything in his defense, and he asked directly. What do you want me to do? Pay me a confidentiality fee. And Shiyu directly held out her palm. Is this considered robbery? Yi Xuan looked at the beautiful girl in front of him, who was asking for money, and suddenly had the illusion that the two of them were in O-sex. Consider it a collaboration. And Shiyu suddenly smiled, I can help you conceal your identity better. Yi Xuan didn't refuse either. He subconsciously felt in his pocket for a cigarette, but found it empty. Name your price, if I can accept it. 50. Yi Xuan suddenly looked weird and asked, is that all? How much money do you have if you buy a mobile phone for a few hundred yuan? And Shiyu felt a bit disgusted. Then why did you rob me? It was fun. Yi Xuan suddenly didn't understand what young girls were thinking nowadays. It's fine if you don't pay, just go somewhere with me. And Shiyu said. Where? Internet cafe. Is there any possibility that it's time for class? Just skip class. And Shiyu said, with her hands in her pockets, what's so strange about that? Besides, the next few classes are large group classes, and the teacher in charge is too old to take roll call. Yi Xuan. Forget it, he can't worry about In Shiyu. After agreeing, Yi Xuan saw the young girl skillfully come to the fence behind the cafeteria and point at the fence, telling him to go through it. Yi Xuan didn't refuse, and after finally squeezing through the narrow gap, he suddenly felt a pain in his back. But the next second, he saw In Shiyu flipping over the wall. The young girl was very agile, but the speed of her fall was too fast, and she almost sat on his face. Perfect score. And Shiyu patted the non-existent dust on the pantyhose under her pleated skirt and stretched again. Noticing Yi Xuan's gaze, she lifted the hem of her skirt and asked, want to see? Yi Xuan twitched the corner of his mouth. If he didn't want to see, why did he let her climb over the fence? Can you even climb over the fence? And Shiyu asked, her eyes full of concern for an elderly person. I'm not even 30 yet, okay? You don't have to protect your waist if you're not 30 yet. The young girl said with a serious tone. Yi Xuan just wanted to sew this girl's mouth shut. Yi Xuan then led In Shiyu to the parking lot and walked up to a black motorcycle. Getting on. And Shiyu surveyed the motorcycle for a while and suddenly said, this thing. It's not very easy to steal. Yi Xuan expressionlessly took out the key and pressed it, and the motorcycle in front of him suddenly lit up. After straddling it, Yi Xuan inserted the key and handed the helmet to In Shiyu, who got on. You're the one who drives a motorcycle worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you buy a mobile phone for a few hundred yuan? And Shiyu looked at it for a while, and seemed quite interested. Anyway, just leave it alone. After In Shiyu got on, Yi Xuan drove off, not speaking the whole way, and soon arrived at an internet cafe nearby. You're driving so slowly. That was the first thing the girl said after getting out of the car. Don't you know how to drive safely? Yi Xuan took off his helmet and said in a bad mood. After the two entered the internet cafe together, the internet manager at the front desk spoke up, going online? Yes, for 2 people. ID cards, how much to charge? We're charging 100 for 100 now. Just charge 30 for 2 people. Yi Xuan didn't plan to stay here for long either. He glanced at In Shiyu and noticed that she was looking around, as if she wasn't paying attention to the conversation the two were having. It was as if she was here for the first time. ID card. Seeing that Inshiyu was taking her time to take out her ID card, Yi Shuang nudged her with his elbow. You need an ID card to go online? What else? Is this your first time here? Yi Shuang looked at her a little strangely. And Shiyu, on the other hand, asked the network administrator if she could go online. Without her ID card. She could also use her electronic ID card to scan her face. Okay. 2 computers were opened, and Yi Shuang and Inshiyu sat together. At first, Yi Shuang thought this guy was an internet-addicted girl, but the next second, Inshiyu refreshed his perception. After she turned on the computer, instead of going online to play games or something, she was observing the expressions of everyone in the internet cafe. What are you doing? Uncle, why would someone come to an internet cafe? Inshiyu suddenly asked. Shouldn't you be asking yourself? I just don't know why I'm here. Yi Shuang heard this and looked at the other guests in the internet cafe again. He just said it casually. Because the configuration here is high. Your own computer is even higher, right? No, for some people, friends are the highest configuration for a computer. Yi Shuang pointed at a few guests not far away playing games in black, and then looked at a guest sleeping in the corner. And for some people, internet cafes are also a good place to fit in. These configurations, you can't just do it by matching them yourself. Chapter 25, Rice. It had only been half an hour since they had left the internet cafe. The Inshiyu beside him hadn't played anything at all, and even his expression was a little lackluster. Uncle, buy me a cup of milk tea. The young girl beside him suddenly held out her hand and pointed to the milk tea shop not far away. Oh. Yi Shuang then led her to the milk tea shop, and after a quick glance, he noticed that the price of milk tea was in the high 20s. Yi Shuang suddenly felt a little emotional. When I was in school, a cup of milk tea was only 2 yuan, and you could add a lot of coconut jelly. And Shiyu puffed up her eyes and said, what kind of old-fashioned statement is that? You're such a party pooper. What's so good about remembering the past? Well. Yi Shuang thought about it for a while, but ultimately didn't have an answer. Maybe it's just because of regret. Regret? Well, regret. It is precisely because nothing is perfect that we long for the past, always thinking, if only I had done this or that. Yi Shuang ordered 2 cups of milk tea, waited a little, and then took the freshly made milk tea from the waitress. And Shiyu looked at Yi Shuang but didn't say anything. After giving the girl a cup, Yi Shuang said, let's go back to school. No. And Shiyu sipped the milk tea in her hand, feeling that it was quite delicious and had a nice flavor. Why? You're quite interesting, uncle. I want to spend more time with you, and Shiyu said. Yi Shuang. I always feel like I'm being bothered. Why did you pretend to be a teacher? And Shiyu suddenly asked. Yi Shuang didn't want to reveal this. If he told this little girl, it would eventually involve Bai Yu and cause trouble. It wasn't a bad thing anyway. Oh. And Shiyu stretched and said, well, I'm going back. Didn't you just say you wanted to spend more time together? Now I don't want to. Uncle, don't you know that girls are fickle? And Shiyu turned her head and smiled slightly. This has become a little fast. Yi Shuang couldn't figure out the girl's temperament either, but since she was going back to school, he had no problem with it at all. After driving back to school, he entered through the wall at the same place as before. After Inshiyu landed, she said goodbye to Yi Shuang, goodbye, pervert uncle. Yi Shuang. Never again. After seeing Inshiyu leave, Yi Shuang took out his phone and looked at the time, noticing that after all this back and forth, it was almost time for lunch. He'd better go check on Bai Yu first. The bell for the last class of the morning rang. In Class A, Bai Yu sat in her seat, her gaze fixed on the window. She had planned to go to the roof to kill time as usual, but then she suddenly remembered the meal card Yi Shuang had given her. Yes, she didn't have to worry about hunger. But she wanted to eat with Yi Shuang and hear his voice. Bai Yu thought about this, but she felt her stomach start to growl. She touched her stomach and then stood up and walked towards the cafeteria. When Luo Che saw Bai Yu get up, he hurriedly got up and followed her. Inshan College has 4 canteens. After all, there are tens of thousands of students, and one canteen cannot meet the demand. Despite this, at noon, the canteens are still full of people standing in line to get their meals, and if you are a little late, most of the good food will be gone. When Bai Yu appeared in the canteen, she immediately attracted a lot of attention. Her long, black waist-length hair and her stunningly beautiful face made many students stare in awe. Is there really a student as beautiful as her in our college? Bai Yu, who was unaware of her own charm, was just looking at the signboards at each window. She had been here before, but was refused food because she didn't have a meal card. At that time, there were also many strange stares from other students around her. Bai Yu walked up to a queue and soon got her turn. "Classmate, what are you having?" the woman at the cafeteria asked. Bai Yu pointed and soon filled the grid on the tray. 21. The cafeteria lady pressed the button on the glass window to charge the meal, and Bai Yu also took out her meal card. With a drop sound, the remaining balance on the card was displayed. 1979. This meal card has 2,000 points? Some students who were paying attention to Bai Yu's side froze when they saw the remaining balance on the machine. Everyone knows that the balance on meal cards is usually only 100 to 200 points, so a balance of 1,000 to 2,000 points is quite rare. What's wrong? After scanning the meal card, the cafeteria auntie saw that Bai Yu was still standing in the same place, so she asked. Bai Yu looked at the plate of food and suddenly whispered, "Rice." "I don't serve rice here," the cafeteria auntie said. Bai Yu heard this, and when the cafeteria auntie saw that she was still standing there, she urged, "Student, please move aside, don't disturb the other students." The young girl silently picked up her tray and then found a seat. Looking at the food on her tray, Bai Yu picked up a lion's head with her chopsticks and ate it in small bites, but she was still thinking about the rice. Yi Shuang said, "You can't be picky about food." "But, I can't find the rice." "If you encounter something you can't solve, you should call him." Bai Yu suddenly remembered what was written in the notebook and took out her phone. To call. "Classmate Bai Yu, can I sit here?" Just then, a voice interrupted Bai Yu's thoughts. Slowly looking up, she saw a familiar face, but Bai Yu still didn't know the other person's name. At this time, Luo Che was carrying a tray of food. Although he was smiling, he looked a little nervous under the gaze of the other person's beautiful eyes. After all, there were so many people here, and it would be embarrassing if he was rejected. The cafeteria was a bit crowded. Luo Che continued, "I can't find a seat." Bai Yu looked at the other person, not quite understanding why the other person was asking her. After all, she didn't buy the tables in the cafeteria, so does she have to ask the other person when looking for a place to sit? After seeing Bai Yu nod, Luo Che's heart suddenly started pounding. The other person didn't reject him. Sure enough, Luo Che immediately sat down opposite Bai Yu and then started looking for a topic of conversation. "Bai Yu, did you get your hair cut yesterday? It's very pretty. Everyone's been talking about your new look today." In the face of praise, Bai Yu didn't respond at all. She continued to look at the empty space on her plate, wondering where she could get some rice. At that moment, the girl also noticed the rice on Luo Che's plate. "Where did you get it?" she asked softly. Luo Che was taken aback. Just now, when he saw that the other person didn't respond, he thought Bai Yu didn't want to talk to him. But what did "where did you get it" mean? But he quickly reacted, "It seems to be asking where I am from." "Yes, Baiyun District, my hometown is in Baiyun District." Bai Yu heard this, but tilted her head slightly. "So, do you have to bring your own rice from home?" Chapter 26, I want to hear. Bai Yu's response. "Don't you eat rice?" Luo Che asked, but then suddenly realized that perhaps the other person simply wanted to maintain their figure. Although Bai Yu was wearing her school uniform, Luo Che knew at a glance that she must have a great figure. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but say, "You already have a great figure. Boys don't like too skinny girls." Bai Yu looked at Luo Che a little strangely, but she didn't say much and continued eating her vegetables. Seeing this scene, Luo Che thought that Bai Yu had taken his words to heart by not speaking, and his face couldn't help but become complacent. Thankfully, he had the foresight to discover Bai Yu's potential. Because of the help she received last time, she must like me too. Luo Che thought to himself, and seeing the young girl's exquisite and perfect face, his heart became even more ecstatic. Otherwise, why would the other person ask him where he was from? Bai Yu didn't know what Luo Che was thinking, and she took out her phone. Add WeChat? Seeing this, Luo Che also took out his phone. He smiled and said, "You scan me." Then, Luo Che showed his QR code. Bai Yu, however, pressed the number and then placed the phone to her ear. The next second, she looked over expressionlessly, as if she didn't understand Luo Che's actions. Luo Che was suddenly embarrassed and remained in place. He silently took back his phone and pretended nothing had happened as he buried his head in his meal. At this time, Bai Yu's phone also connected. Hello? Yi Shuang. Hearing the familiar voice, Bai Yu whispered. Even she herself didn't know. After hearing Yi Shuang's voice, the girl's face actually revealed an imperceptible trace of relaxation and tenderness. Are you eating well? Yi Shuang also smiled at the other end of the phone. I'm eating well. Bai Yu said. Rice? No, I have to bring it from home. Eh? Yi Shuang obviously froze for a moment. What do you mean bring rice from home? You mean you have to bring your own rice from home? The food at school is not good? There is no rice at school. How can there not be any? Yi Shuang's tone softened, and she patiently said, Have you looked in the wrong place? The food ordering window is on the far left, and rice and vegetables are not ordered at the same window. Yi Shuang had checked out the general situation of the cafeteria the day before. Bai Yu realized this at this time, and when she looked to the far left, she saw some students ordering food. Have you encountered any more problems this morning? Yi Shuang asked. After all, he had followed that guy and Shiyu out. No, you said if you encountered something you couldn't solve, you could call. Right. Bai Yu thought for a moment, and suddenly asked, If I didn't encounter anything, could I call? What's the point of calling if you didn't encounter anything? Yi Shuang's laughter came through. I don't know, Bai Yu's voice lowered. I just want to hear your voice. There was a moment of silence at the other end of the line, but Bai Yu was quickly responded to, and it was limited to lunchtime only. Okay. Eat well first, you need to rest well for your afternoon classes. Yi Shuang said a few more words before quickly hanging up the phone. Bai Yu put the phone down a little reluctantly, her slender fingers touching the screen as her downcast eyes wondered what she was thinking. Bai Yu, was that your mother on the other end of the phone? Luo Che asked, sensing a strange vibe in the few words Bai Yu had spoken. Bai Yu just shook her head in response to Luo Che's question, and said, No. That's a couple. Bai Yu thought about it for a moment, and said very seriously. Husband and wife? Bai Yu's words instantly petrified Luo Che in place, as if he had been hit by a critical blow. At this moment, the young girl also picked up her plate and planned to go get her food, but she didn't know that this scene, as seen by Luo Che, looked like the other person didn't want to say anything more to him, and just picked up her plate and left. This made Luo Che feel stupid all of a sudden. Not long after, Bai Yu also returned with her lunch, and the pile of white rice on the young girl's plate was now as exaggerated as a small mountain. Bai Yu also noticed that Luo Che had already left, but for her, it was not something worth caring about. After sitting down, she began to eat in small bites. Lunch quickly ended, and Bai Yu also finished eating the food on her plate. She was full. Bai Yu patted her flat stomach, but what she was thinking about was Yi Shuang's dinner that night. She returned to class, but noticed that her desk and chair were gone. In the past, at this time, some students in class would just hold back their laughter and look uninvolved. But this time, a boy kindly reminded her, Wuya took your desk and chair. After hearing this, Bai Yu thought for a moment, walked over to Wuya's seat, and then moved her desk and chair to her own position, where she just laid down and started to rest. As the time for the first class of the afternoon began to approach, the students who had been outside for lunch began to return to the classroom one after the other. Wuya was no exception. When she returned to the classroom, her expression was full of smugness, because when Bai Yu went to the cafeteria to eat, Wuya had moved her desk and chair outside. After all, Bai Yu had made her lose face in front of everyone, so she would definitely get even. But when she saw Bai Yu resting on the table, her brain suddenly shrunk. No, where did she get the table and chair? But soon Wuya understood, because her table and chair were gone. Just then, the homeroom teacher also walked in. After all, Wuya had returned to class at the break time, and the afternoon was also the homeroom teacher's Chinese class. After all the students had sat down, the homeroom teacher looked at Wuya, who was standing there with a red face, and said, Wuya, what are you standing there for? Wuya immediately said, My seat is gone. Bai Yu took it. The homeroom teacher frowned. What are these kids up to now? Bai Yu, what's going on with you? Why did you take Wuya's desk and chair? The homeroom teacher immediately questioned her. Bai Yu looked at the homeroom teacher and then answered his question, because Wuya took my desk and chair. The homeroom teacher immediately slammed his hand on the table. Even if she took your desk and chair, you. Ha? Bai Yu answered with an innocent look, immediately making the homeroom teacher's CPU smoke. His expression was once again awkward. Wuya reported Bai Yu for taking away her desk and chair, but the reason was that Wuya had taken Bai Yu's desk and chair first. Good guy, the villain accuses first? Wuya, why is it you again? The homeroom teacher was furious this time. Is this Wuya never ending? I don't care what conflict you have with Bai Yu, as long as I hear your name come out of her mouth again, you just wait until I have a good talk with your parents about your performance at the academy. Chapter 27, Learning. At 4 p.m., it was time for school to let out. Yi Shuang stood at the school gate waiting for Bai Yu to let out of school. In a short while, he saw the young girl walk out. At this time, there were some boys around her, seemingly inviting Bai Yu to hang out after school. But Bai Yu paid no attention, and under the bangs that swayed gently in the wind, her small face still had no expression. Yi Shuang saw a scene that was completely different from yesterday, and he wasn't at all surprised. This is a world that looks at faces. Although some people always say that inner beauty is the real beauty, no one will bother to get to know someone's inner self through an unattractive shell. This is the reality. It's a bit like when I was young and girls would surround me after school. Yi Shuang felt in his pocket and was about to light a cigarette, but found that there was only a small box containing chewing gum. This withdrawal reaction is really uncomfortable. He muttered, took the chewing gum out of the small box, and threw it into his mouth to chew. At this time, Bai Yu also noticed the figure at the school gate that was about to put on a helmet. Her beautiful eyes lit up, and she trotted over. Finally, in the shocked gaze of the boys, she threw herself directly into Yi Shuang's arms. It's too close, I can't always grasp the distance. Seeing Bai Yu hugging him, Yi Shuang patted her head and said, I wanted to see you. Bai Yu slowly looked up and said. She didn't really understand love and romance, but she expressed her thoughts most honestly. Let's go shopping. Yi Shuang pinched her soft face a little, then handed over the helmet in his hand. Then, Yi Shuang also looked at the boys who were standing stupidly in the distance. A few seconds later, he took his eyes off them and got on the motorcycle. He took Bai Yu away from the school gate. The two of them rode their motorcycle on the highway. They didn't go to the market, but to a large chain of fresh food supermarkets. After parking the motorcycle in the underground parking lot, they went to the elevator. Yi Shuang didn't care about the strange stares of the people taking the elevator next to them, but instead explained to Bai Yu what an elevator was and how to learn to look at the floor you want to go to. Bai Yu was a very good learner. Yi Shuang only needed to explain it once, and she understood. As for the lack of common sense in life, Yi Shuang plans to take Bai Yu to see more things. Not to mention Bai Yu, in fact, there are still many young people who don't know how to take the high-speed rail and fly, and they are not unable to learn, they simply have not experienced it. Bai Yu, with no experience, is like a blank piece of paper. If the rumors in the neighborhood are true, then the girl, who lacked common sense during the years she was locked in the attic, simply could not learn these things. At the very least, her 3 views need to be cultivated first. Am I considered a guardian? Yi Shuang couldn't help but think as he turned his head and glanced at Bai Yu, who was following him by holding his hand. However, Yi Shuang also discovered that this girl trusted him too much. Even if he sold her, she might still help count the money. In a supermarket like this, you have to pay attention to the production date and price when buying things. Yi Shuang took an item off the shelf. Bai Yu nodded lightly, but soon her gaze turned to Yi Shuang. Why are you always looking at me? I don't know. Pay attention. Yi Shuang tapped the other person on the head. Then Yi Shuang led Bai Yu to the food ingredients area and began to explain. Look at this piece of pork. Yi Shuang took a piece of pork out of the refrigerator and showed it to Bai Yu. When is it? After seeing the date on it, Bai Yu said, today. Although it says today, meat ingredients are a bit special. Yi Shuang said. In a supermarket like this one, if the pork hasn't been sold that day, they will rip open the packaging and smell it to see if it has gone bad. If they don't smell anything, they will package it with a new date, so as to deceive customers. Bai Yu listened and suddenly asked, deceiving customers is not good. Yes, but many people will betray their conscience for the sake of profit. Yi Shuang smiled slightly and said, of course, the example I gave is just that, just to show you that it is possible. So in a supermarket like this, try to buy less meat. Yi Shuang remembered that on several occasions when he went to the nearby RT Mart to buy ingredients, he tore open the chilled pork with the date on it for that day, and the result was a stench that hit him in the face. Of course, if it's a large chain that specializes in freshness, it can actually be trusted. Bai Yu nodded to indicate that she understood. At this moment, the young girl suddenly noticed a couple passing by, holding hands and seeming very intimate. Bai Yu glanced at her holding Yi Shuang's hand again. She then let go of his hand and put her arm around his shoulders, leaning in close. What's wrong? Yi Shuang froze for a moment as his arm was wrapped in a soft embrace. So this is how they. Following Bai Yu's gaze, Yi Shuang also noticed the couple. That's something couples do. Yi Shuang said. We will be husband and wife in the future, because you said that husband and wife can live together forever. Bai Yu said. Yi Shuang. He thought about it and wondered how to explain to Bai Yu what a husband and wife were. Forget it, she probably still doesn't understand very well. She'll probably understand when she meets a boy she likes in the future. Yi Shuang thought about it and let Bai Yu hold his arm like that. It was just that the softness was a little bit too much. After buying some groceries and ingredients, Yi Shuang took Bai Yu to the checkout counter. Hello, that's 79 yuan in total. The cashier said. Yi Shuang looked at Bai Yu next to him and said, pay the money. The cashier's expression suddenly became strange. How can you, an adult, let a student pay? At this time, Bai Yu also used her fingers to awkwardly press her phone, and finally managed to get the payment QR code out. Ding! Payment successful. Did you learn? You'll be paying from now on. Yi Shuang said, after all, the cash has been saved up, so this girl must learn to use mobile payments properly. What the hell, are you a kept man? The cashier on the side heard this and her expression suddenly became strange, but of course she wouldn't show it, just kept looking at the strange pair of Yi Shuang and Bai Yu. After paying for their purchases, Yi Shuang and Bai Yu walked to the elevator, and at that moment, they ran into the same couple they had just met. Coincidentally, the couple pecked each other on the cheek and then smiled at each other. After seeing this, Bai Yu turned her head towards Yi Shuang. Chapter 28, Shanghai has an appointment. Do you want to drink soup tonight? Seeing that Bai Yu was eager to act on the actions of the couple, Yi Shuang immediately changed the subject. Soup. Right, what kind of soup do you want? Seeing that the little eater's attention was attracted by food, Yi Shuang smiled slightly. Bai Yu thought for a moment, lowered her eyes, and said, I haven't drunk it before. You haven't drunk it before? Bai Yu seemed to have thought of something. I've had instant noodle soup before, it's salty and spicy. That doesn't count. Yi Shuang said gently. In that case, let's make corn, radish and pork rib soup, and save the soup. Save the soup? Yes. What save the soup? Air. After buying some fresh pork ribs at the nearby market, Yi Shuang and Bai Yu went straight to the kitchen as soon as they got home. Bai Yu, chop some ginger for me. Yi Shuang cleaned the ribs a little and then took out the soup pot she had bought. Good. Bai Yu has learned to chop vegetables, at least she no longer makes the gesture of holding the knife high in the air, after all, she doesn't have enough hands for this kind of posture. Yi Shuang put the ribs in cold water, then threw in some ginger that Bai Yu had chopped and started the fire to boil the water. Very well chopped. Yi Shuang did not stint on his praise as he taught Bai Yu. Although Bai Yu didn't show much emotion, her slightly swaying hair showed that she was in a good mood after being praised by Yi Shuang. How can someone from our province not know how to make soup? Yi Shuang looked at Bai Yu next to him and said with a smile, remember this well, and you can make it for yourself in the future. Bai Yu suddenly looked up, tilting her head slightly. For yourself. Yi Shuang, aren't you going to drink it with me? Yi Shuang was taken aback. He hadn't expected Bai Yu to be so sensitive, and said, I'll drink it too. I mean, I want to drink the soup you make. Oh. Bai Yu nodded as she watched the pot gradually begin to bubble. The first step in making pork rib soup is to blanch the ribs. Yi Shuang explained that the purpose of blanching is to remove impurities and blood foam, so cold water is needed. Bai Yu asked, why cold water? If you use hot water, the blood foam and fat in the ribs will solidify and get locked in the meat as soon as they are put in the pot, and they won't be able to be released. So you need to slowly heat the water to let them release. Yi Shuang explained in great detail so that Bai Yu could take good care of herself after she learned how to make it. The next step is very simple, skim off the scum, then add the carrots and corn. It's a home version of corn and carrot rib soup. Add some salt. When it's almost done, Yi Shuang added some salt. By the way, remember to add the salt just before serving, because adding salt too early will make the meat of the ribs tough, and the taste won't come out easily, and the texture will also be quite poor. Bai Yuyo nodded. The taste is good. Yi Shuang served some in a bowl and offered it to Bai Yuyo to taste and try. Bai Yuyo looked at the clear pork rib soup in the bowl and took a small sip. It was delicious. A light blush appeared on Bai Yuyo's snow-white face, and the sweet pork rib soup made her feel warm all over. Right. Yi Shuang smiled. At this time, Bai Yuyo handed over the bowl, but left a mouthful. Yi Shuang, you drink it too. It's delicious. Yi Shuang looked at the bowl in Bai Yuyo's hand and had to say, no. Why? Because you can't just give someone else a bowl you've already drunk from. Yi Shuang said. Bai Yuyo didn't understand, but she nodded when she heard him say that. Yi Shuang fried 2 more dishes, and then let Bai Yuyo learn how to fry an egg. When she fried a black, unidentified object, Yi Shuang realized that the girl might not have any culinary talent. It was already 7 p.m. when they finished eating. Bai Yuyo did not pester Yi Shuang to take a bath with her this time, because Yi Shuang had told her that she could only choose between taking a bath and sleeping together. Bai Yuyo thought about it for a while, and finally decided that sleeping together was better. Because you can only bathe for a while, but you can spend longer time with Yi Shuang when you sleep. After seeing Bai Yuyo go to the bathroom, Yi Shuang just took out his phone and planned to casually browse the news for a while, but he found that Chen Hai had sent him a few new messages. Chen Hai, do you have time? Let's go out for tea. Yi Shuang saw the message and immediately called Chen Hai. After a while, the phone on the other end picked up. Hello. Why did you suddenly want to go out for tea? Yi Shuang asked. For some reason, Chen Hai's voice suddenly sounded a bit unnatural. After a few seconds, he said, if you're free, let's get together. Yi Shuang didn't notice anything unusual in Chen Hai's voice, so she simply agreed, saying, sure, I just finished dinner too. Where should we meet? You've already eaten? Forget it, then. Get some rest after dinner. Chen Hai suddenly changed his mind. Yi Shuang sensed something strange. What's wrong with you? You're acting weird. No. I'll give you the address. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Yi Shuang glanced at the bathroom again. After thinking for a moment, she said through the bathroom door. Bai Yuyo, I'm going out to meet some friends. After you showered, stay at home and behave yourself. The next second, the bathroom door opened, and Bai Yuyo walked out stark naked. Idiot, don't just run out like that naked. Yi Shuang immediately pushed Bai Yuyo back in. After about a minute, Bai Yuyo reappeared, still wet and in her clothes. Yi Shuang. He regretted it a little. If only he had waited until after Bai Yuyo had finished showering. What's your hurry? Yi Shuang took out a large bath towel and dried the water droplets from Bai Yuyo's hair. Then he said, raise your hands. Bai Yuyo obediently raised her hands, and Yi Shuang took off her damp, flesh-colored clothes and wrapped the young girl in the towel. I don't want to be separated from you, Bai Yuyo whispered. Yi Shuang suddenly realized that the girl in front of him seemed to be a bit too attached to him, even though they had not spent much time together. However, thinking about what had happened to Bai Yuyo, it was not surprising that she, who had no one to rely on, would cling to him. Yi Shuang thought about it for a while, and since Chen Hai had also met Bai Yuyo, it was not impossible to simply bring her along. At that time, he could prepare some melon seeds or something for Bai Yuyo, and let her sit quietly on the side. Then I'll take you with me. Okay. Don't suddenly hug me like that, you'll drop the towel. Yi Shuang rode his motorcycle to the destination agreed with Chen Hai, which was actually an apartment in Chen Hai's home. After arriving on the 20th floor, Yi Shuang rang the doorbell of a household. Chen Hai. After a while, the door opened, but it wasn't Chen Hai who appeared, but a tall, beautiful woman with wavy hair. Yi Shuang. Chen Qin? Chapter 29, Everything I Have Is Yours. At this time, Chen Hai also appeared not far behind Chen Qin, looking over with an embarrassed face. Yi Shuang realized at this time that perhaps the person who had just sent him a message was not Chen Hai, but this woman in front of him. Looking at this familiar face, Yi Shuang smiled and said, long time no see. Chen Qin was wearing a light yellow dress, with a mature and charming figure. She raised her hand and hugged her arm, and the diamond bracelet on her snow-white wrist slightly refracted a fiery glow in the light. She just looked at Yi Shuang, her eyes flowing, as if she had a myriad of emotions. After 1,000 words, Chen Qin finally just lightly humming, is that all you have to say? Soon, her gaze also fell on the young girl next to Yi Shuang, and she couldn't help but lightly frown between her eyebrows. Who is she? Chen Qin's gaze was full of scrutiny and pressure, and it also made Bai Yu a little confused. She seemed to feel the hostility from the other party. Okay, come in first, why are you standing outside chatting? Chen Hai happened to interrupt the atmosphere at the scene at this time. Chen Xin also returned inside at this time and sat on the sofa, her fitted long skirt hugging her tall and curvy figure, her long wavy hair falling behind her shoulders. The bright red lipstick on her fair face made her look like a haughty princess. It really hasn't changed from the old days. Yi Xuan led Bai Yu into the house. Chen Xin, that guy, just before you arrived, he kept hanging around the door, changing his clothes several times, Chen Hai said in a low voice. Chen Hai, what are you muttering about? No, nothing. Chen Hai is obviously the older brother, but Chen Xin is always putting him down. But the three of them grew up together, and Yi Shuang is used to seeing this kind of scene. After sitting down on the soft sofa, Chen Hai also threw over a box of cigarettes printed with English, saying, try some. Yi Shuang subconsciously took the cigarettes. Chen Xin brought them for you while he was on a business trip abroad, Chen Hai added with a smile. I bought them on the way here. Chen Xin, leaning back on the sofa, said without turning her head, I was going to throw them away. Yi Shuang, however, placed the cigarette box on the table, shook his head, and said, I quit smoking recently. His words caused a sudden silence in the room. Not only was Chen Hai stunned, but Chen Xin, who was standing nearby, looked over at him in a little bit of shock, her pretty face full of disbelief. Are you okay? Do you have lung cancer? You've been smoking this stuff for more than 10 years and I've never heard you say you want to quit. Chen Hai said. Chen Xin also looked at Yi Shuang, as if she sensed something strange. Sooner or later, I have to quit. Yi Shuang said, taking a candy out of his pocket and throwing it into his mouth. Chen Xin looked at Yi Shuang carefully and suddenly said, your current state is much better than I expected. I thought you would be devastated because of that woman. Yeah, when this guy disappeared, I thought he had become a homeless person. Chen Hai was also smiling. More or less. Yi Shuang thought about his state at the time, and it seemed to be more or less the same. He subconsciously glanced at Bai Yu, and at this time the young girl was quietly sitting next to him. This relative's child of yours doesn't seem to understand what we're saying. Chen Hai also asked teasingly at this time, is she your cousin? Yi Shuang was about to answer when Bai Yu whispered from the side. We are husband and wife. Chen Xin and Chen Hai both froze, and even Chen Xin's phone dropped to the ground without any reaction. The atmosphere was deathly silent. The next second, Chen Xin, who had just changed from her arrogant and cold appearance, pounced over and grabbed Yi Shuang's shirt in front of her chest. Her emotions began to rise as well. Yi Shuang, why have you never considered me? You actually went after a child like this? Am I not pretty enough? What exactly is the difference between them and me? Soon, Chen Xin's eyes began to water, and she told me, I have obviously liked you since I was a child. Why? Chen Xin and Yi Shuang grew up together. Since she could remember, she has adored Yi Shuang every moment of every day, but she has also been very restrained after Yi Shuang met that woman. Chen Xin buried all her feelings deep down in her heart, and even chose to go abroad for further studies to avoid her feelings. Now that Yi Shuang has broken up with her, Chen Xin is angry with the woman in her heart, but at the same time she is a little relieved, because it means she has a chance. But tonight, Yi Shuang suddenly brought a girl along, and the girl even said that the two of them were husband and wife. This scene almost made her emotional breakdown, and she could no longer use indifference and arrogance to disguise herself. I was here first. They were so close, but in the end they couldn't break through that last barrier. Yi Shuang looked at the excited Chen Xin in front of him, and suddenly turned to Chen Hai next to him and said, Hi, can you ask Bai Yu to stay in the room for a while first? Chen Hai froze for a moment, and also realized that Yi Shuang might want to say something to Chen Xin alone. Bai Yu, you stay in the room with my friend for a while, I have something to tell her. Yi Shuang also said to Bai Yu. Bai Yu obediently nodded. The apartment was duplex. After Chen Hai took Bai Yu upstairs, Yi Shuang's gaze returned to Chen Xin. At this time, Chen Xin's eyes were just red, as if she was staring at herself with some reluctance. Do you want to hear my explanation? Yi Shuang said. Chen Xin didn't answer, but in fact, with her temperament, even if Yi Shuang cheated on her, she would believe it. We are not the kind of relationship you think. As soon as Yi Shuang opened his mouth, he suddenly felt that this sentence of his sounded a bit like a scumbag. Chen Xin just stared at Yi Shuang, her voice tinged with an imperceptible hint of a sob, and continued. Then Yi Shuang retold the whole story from beginning to end. When Chen Xin heard that the girl might have been locked in the attic for 8 years, resulting in her having almost no self-care ability, a trace of disbelief appeared on her face. You're not lying to me? Chen Xin frowned. What's there to lie about? Yi Shuang said. If it were any other girl, she might have said at this point, you're really something, Weaver girl. But Chen Xin is different. She is the girl Yi Shuang once told that if she wished for a shooting star to appear, her wish would come true, and she really waited every night foolishly for the shooting star to appear. You really aren't in a relationship? You really aren't married? No, she just turned 18, okay? Yi Shuang's gaze slowly moved downward, and, how long are you going to sit on me? Chen Xin pretended not to hear, but instead moved her butt forward to press even closer against Yi Shuang. At this time, she exuded a charming perfume scent, then looked down at Yi Shuang. In the light, the amethyst pendant on her earlobe added a touch of charm. She said softly, Then I'll support you too, okay? I'm richer than that girl. Everything I have is yours if you want it. Chapter 30, Mobility Scooter. Yi Shuang let out a slow breath, then reached out and placed a hand on the other person's soft waist, which was as restless as a water snake. She's not like you. So what are you going to do? Just stay by that girl's side and take care of her. Chen Xin's tone was faint, and she leaned forward, inserting her fingers directly between Yi Shuang's fingers and lightly clasping them. I want your care too. Seeing that Yi Shuang was silent, Chen Xin also realized that she had overreacted. She let go of her hand and got off Yi Shuang's body, humming softly. Although I shouldn't say this, I really can't let go of that child. Yi Shuang said. So what are you going to do next? And why didn't you come to us when something so big happened? I was at a loss. Yi Shuang shook his head. I originally thought that I could do a lot of things, but reality tells me, you are just an ordinary person. I really don't know how to go on living in this city. I have no goals, and I just drift through each day, repeating the same actions over and over again. Once I thought that work was the whole point of life, so after losing my job, it felt like I'd lost everything. He laughed, but these past few days have made me feel differently. It turns out that you don't have to work hard to live. I've been bound by success for too long, but actually living a simple life like that is actually pretty good. Once, getting a good night's sleep was a luxury, but now I can wake up naturally every day, and I think this is a good way to live. Before that girl grows up, I don't have any other plans. Chen Xin fell silent for a moment, and then suddenly said. That was the first time I'd heard someone describe being a kept man in such a refreshing way. Right? I was surprised too. Yi Shuang smiled. Chen Xin sighed, patted her plump grain bag, and then gave Yi Shuang a reproachful glance. But she also knew that although Yi Shuang appeared to be calm on the surface, he also needed time to heal. You're not falling for that little girl, are you? Chen Xin shrugged her nose, as if she were inquiring with a sense of crisis. What do you think? Chen Xin propped her face with one hand. Under her dark brown hair, her face had an indescribable charm. The corners of her red lips formed a beautiful arc. You can't even look at me when I'm this beautiful, who knows if you're really just a cougar? Am I really that old? Who knows, after all, it's your birthday next week. Chen Xin said. Birthday? Yi Shuang froze for a moment, then subconsciously took out his phone and glanced at it, and found that it was indeed almost his birthday. He can't even remember his own birthday, but he remembers the woman's birthday so clearly. Chen Xin muttered. It's all in the past. Yi Shuang couldn't help but feel emotional. Is he really going to be 27? How can it be that in the blink of an eye I'm about to turn 30? Tomorrow I have a business trip to go abroad. Chen Xin took out a small box from the table next to her, and this was the birthday present, given to you in advance because I won't be able to come back on your birthday. Yi Shuang took the box and found it quite light. It seemed like he hadn't received a birthday present from Chen Xin's hands for a long time. Ever since he started dating that person, Chen Xin had been avoiding him on purpose or by accident. What's inside? Just open it and find out? Yi Shuang simply opened it and found a car key lying inside. I only gave the down payment, you remember to pay 8,000 yuan each month. Chen Xin said. Isn't that too much? Just kidding, I heard that you borrowed that guy Chen Hai's precious motorcycle. If you crash it, he'll be heartbroken, right? Chen Xin smiled slightly. Okay, it's just an ordinary Toyota car, you can take it. Yi Shuang looked at the Toyota car keys in his hands, but said, "Who gives a car for a birthday? If this goes on, are you going to give a suite next year?" Chen Qin heard this and blushed. "You can, not only a house, I can give you my company as well." Yi Shuang pulled the corners of his mouth. "Giving a car is still a bit much, I can't take it." "Oh, you're going to complain about a broken car? When did you become like this?" Chen Qin suddenly glared at Yi Shuang, "So just consider it a loan. You're being so picky about a car, I'm just afraid you'll break Shanghai's fat man's car." "That's more like you." Yi Shuang saw the extremely irritable Chen Qin and just felt a familiar feeling return. After all, that blushing and shy look was just too incongruous. "Oof. But when did you start worrying about Shanghai's car? Who cares about him?" Achoo. At this moment, Shanghai, who was sitting upstairs with Bai Yu, suddenly sneezed. He rubbed his nose and cursed, "Damn it, those two downstairs aren't saying anything bad about me, are they? Or is his wife at home holding a grudge against him?" At this moment, Shanghai also looked at Bai Yu, who was quietly sitting in front of him. After looking him up and down, he thought to himself, Yi Shuang wouldn't do something to a student that young, would he? But she is indeed pretty, and in another 2 years, she will be a disaster of a woman. "Sister, why did you say that you and Yi Shuang are husband and wife?" Bai Yu said expressionlessly when she heard this. Yi Shuang said that husband and wife can sleep together. What the hell? Shanghai's expression suddenly became wonderful. So you did it?" Bai Yu looked at Shanghai's gesture and just tilted her head in confusion. "It's what couples do." "Did you do it?" Bai Yu thought Shanghai was talking about eating and sleeping together, so she nodded and said, "Yes, we did." Shanghai suddenly felt quite sorry for his sister, but he also respected Yi Shuang's choice. Chen Qin, that guy, when he was little, wanted to drag Yi Shuang into a room and ravish her, but didn't have the guts, and instead, was won over by such a little sister. Alas, poor child. Shanghai was thinking about Chen Qin. Unlike him, he got married early and had a good life. Just then, the phone vibrated too, a message from Yi Shuang. "Let's go, we're coming down." Oh. Shanghai led Bai Yu downstairs and found Yi Shuang and Chen Qin sitting on the sofa, both of them having gathered their thoughts and chatting idly. "You're awesome." Chen Qin can't hold back his tears for more than 3 days, but you were able to suppress the big devil. Shanghai gave a thumbs up. "What did you say, you fat ass?" Chen Qin glared at him. Yi Shuang just said that there was some misunderstanding, and it would be fine once it was resolved. The several people sat down and chatted with their own thoughts, but they all tacitly refrained from talking about the things that concerned them. Soon it was 11 o'clock, and Yi Shuang and the others should go home. After returning the scooter's key to Shanghai, Yi Shuang led Bai Yu to the parking lot. After scanning the area, Yi Shuang couldn't find the so-called Toyota mobility scooter. Cars like the Corolla should be easy to recognize. After thinking about it, he pressed the unlock button on the key. Not far away, the headlights suddenly flickered. Where? Yi Shuang led Bai Yu over, and when they saw the pure white rear of the car, they were suddenly silent. Yi Shuang silently took out his phone and directly called Chen Qin. "What's wrong? Have you thought it through?" From the other end of the line came Chen Qin's cheerful voice. "You call this a mobility scooter?" Yi Shuang looked at the Toyota Supra in front of him and continued. "Isn't this a sports car?" "Yes, a mobility sports car." Yi Shuang.